A shocking event occurred near Bogotá Park in Colombia on January 22, 2023. A local sanitation worker was rummaging through a dumpster when he suddenly froze in horror at what he saw at the very bottom. There lay a blue suitcase wrapped in black tape, surrounded by several trash bags. But what shocked the man the most was that a human head was sticking out from under the suitcase lid. Yes, inside the suitcase was a woman's body. There was no doubt about it. Frightened by the gruesome discovery, the worker drove a few blocks before contacting law enforcement. A group of police officers immediately rushed to the scene to verify the information received. What they saw shocked even the most experienced cops. A twisted, lifeless corpse was stuffed inside the suitcase. Later, an examination established the identity of the deceased. It turned out to be Valentina Trespalacios. During the initial examination of the body, no signs of the use of firearms or bladed weapons were found, nor any evidence of dismemberment. An interesting fact was that the murdered woman was wearing a nightgown with a belt, which led to the conclusion that the killer had attacked the victim in her sleep. By the way, the girl was identified thanks to the contents of a black cardboard box next to the suitcase. Inside Valentina's student ID, the password she used when applying for a certificate, and other documents and personal belongings were found. In my opinion, it's quite unusual that these papers weren't destroyed by the perpetrator, because usually in such cases, killers try not to leave any trace. The police contacted the victim's relatives, who confirmed that on Saturday, January 21, Valentina was in the company of her boyfriend, U.S. citizen. But the autopsy results painted a horrific picture. Multiple blows to the head, numerous injuries to the body, hemorrhages in the tongue, and a mysterious burn on the buttocks. Everything indicated that the cause of death was asphyxiation. The investigation now faced the task of reconstructing the events of that fatal evening in order to track down the killer and understand the motives behind this horrific crime. So far, there are more questions than answers. Valentina Trespalacios, born in 2001, was from Bogotá, Colombia. This young girl was studying at the Faculty of Commerce and International Business, but her true passion was music. From an early age, Valentina showed remarkable talent and a keen ear for music, which allowed her to start a career as a DJ in her home country after receiving a professional DJ diploma. For 3 years, Valentina actively developed as a DJ, which led to her circle of friends and acquaintances, including many foreigners. The girl often visited other countries, where she gained experience and shared her own developments. During this period, she had the opportunity to perform on the same stage with famous artists and celebrities, toured more than 20 cities in Colombia, and participated in large-scale international events in her genre. Valentina managed to perform at festivals and tour Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, and Peru. Everyone around her noted that this talented girl had a great future ahead of her. Valentina's popularity was growing steadily. She was an in-demand DJ throughout the country and left her mark in the best nightclubs while doing what she loved most. According to those who knew her, Valentina was a cheerful and happy young woman who enjoyed the atmosphere of parties and gatherings. Moreover, she was active on social media, telling her subscribers about her performances on stage and keeping them informed about the events of her busy daily life. Very recently, Valentina was recognized as the best amateur DJ in Colombia in the field of electronic music, which only confirmed her growing success and popularity. However, in her social networks, the girl shared not only her professional achievements. She also talked about her romance with an American named John Poulos, whom she met online at the end of 2021. At first, despite regular communication, Valentina was in no hurry to start a serious relationship, but over time, real feelings flared up between her and John, and the young people became a couple. It would seem that nothing foreshadowed trouble in the life of this talented and successful girl, at least at first glance. What happened next was so unexpected that I almost dropped my coffee. John Poulos, an American, indeed had serious intentions regarding a shared future with Valentina. So serious that the man financed her cosmetic procedures, lip augmentation with hyaluronic acid and cheekbone correction. Moreover, Poulos even advised his beloved to get breast implants. All these radical changes in appearance that occurred over several months transformed Valentina into a real center of attention wherever she appeared. It seemed that John was truly in love. He regularly sent money to the girl and soon started thinking about marriage. Poulos intended to move to Colombia to be near Valentina and start a family. However, the girl had some doubts about this union because John showed excessive jealousy. Imagine he even hired a private detective to monitor all of Valentina's acquaintances and movements. Of course, such behavior alarmed the girl's family when she shared her concerns and this situation with her. However, in January 2023, Poulos was firmly determined to share his life with his beloved woman. He began the process of preparing documents for marriage with Valentina and rented an apartment in the north of Bogotá. There, the couple planned to spend weekends until they found a permanent place to live. John arrived in the Colombian capital on Thursday, January 19th. Surveillance cameras in the building recorded him entering the apartment around 11 p.m., carrying a blue travel suitcase. By the way, the suitcase was very similar to the one in which Valentina's body was later found. An ominous coincidence, isn't it? Of course, when the gruesome discovery became known, Poulos immediately came under the sights of law enforcement after all. He was the last person to see the girl alive. However, the detectives' attempts to contact John proved futile. All calls were forwarded to voicemail. For Valentina's relatives, Poulos had always seemed like a good person, calm and benevolent. They didn't notice any aggression in him, and his intention to marry the young woman seemed like sincere love. No one could even imagine that John could be involved in this terrible crime, but the doubts dissipated when investigators visited the building where the man was renting an apartment. Poulos disappeared in an unknown direction, only worsening his already shaky position in the eyes of the police. My friends, a very important point: the creation of such content requires a lot of time, and right now my channel and I are going through a difficult financial situation. I would be immensely grateful if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation, and in return I will be able to personally respond to you in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors. I will be eternally grateful to you. What happened next turned this case into a real thriller. The first alarming bell rang immediately after it became known about Valentina's death. Early in the morning on Monday, January 23, John Poulos deleted all his social media profiles. At that time, he was already considered the main and only suspect in this case. Proof of this was the recordings from surveillance cameras in the building, which were meticulously studied by investigators from the police and the Colombian prosecutor's office. For hours, law enforcement officers reviewed the video materials, tracking the movements of the young couple from Friday evening to Sunday morning. It was during this time that Valentina's body was thrown into a dumpster. In addition, the detectives analyzed the couple's correspondence on WhatsApp, which shed light on the last hours of the girl's life. It seemed that these messages were leading the investigation in the right direction. At first, everything went according to plan. Valentina and John agreed to meet on January 20th. But Poulos decided to fly in a day earlier and immediately check into the apartment that the couple planned to rent together. In the evening, he sent the girl a message, and that's when the first misunderstandings began. Valentina couldn't meet with her beloved because she had already promised a friend to go to a party. Moreover, she didn't expect John's early arrival at all. Poulos, in turn, began to get jealous, asking if there were other men at that party. An irritated Valentina replied that it was just his unfounded suspicions and reminded him that they had agreed to meet on the 20th. By the way, the girl planned a series of meetings before meeting her boyfriend. She needed to get ready, get eyelash extensions, and visit a hairdresser. Because of this quarrel, the couple did not see each other throughout the day on January 20th. Only in the evening did surveillance cameras record both of them arriving at the parking lot near Valentina's apartment. Around 6 p.m., John was collecting the girls' things to move to a new place and start living together. That same day, Valentina said goodbye to her family and friends and went to the address specified by Poulos by car. On the way, she called her mother via video and said that she was going home. The recording showed that John, who had rented this car to transport his beloved's belongings, was sitting next to the girl in the car. At 7 p.m., the cameras recorded the couple entering the new apartment together with Valentina's things. A few minutes later, the girl was already sending videos to her loved ones, showing the apartment and how she and John went back to the car several times to get suitcases. Finally, around 1 in the morning, already on January 21st, the surveillance recorded the couple who had finished all the hassles of moving and finally returned to their new nest. What happened next became a real test for the investigative team. Who could have thought that this would be Valentina's last night in this life? Somewhere around 3 in the morning, after a few hours of settling into the new apartment and resting, Valentina and John decided to have some fun and called a taxi to a nightclub in the south of Bogotá. The girl had previously arranged for a small presentation at this establishment, so she was supposed to perform there as a guest DJ. The young couple arrived at their destination around 4 in the morning. Valentina immediately took her place at the DJ booth, and her partner stayed by her side the entire time, watching his beloved work. Around 5 in the morning, Valentina's fiery set came to an end, and the couple, holding hands, headed to the club's office space. It was there that they met with the owner of the establishment, his wife, and her close friend. What exactly the young people talked about with this company is not known for certain. but it's quite possible that some details from that conversation could shed light on the horrific events that unfolded later. Anyway, by 6 in the morning, Valentina and John left the club. None of those present could have thought that they were seeing the girl alive for the last time. However, later that same day, Trespalacios did remind them of herself, and at that moment it seemed that she was fine. On that Saturday, she called one of her closest friends and said that she didn't plan to go out anywhere else. She said that most likely she would just stay in the apartment with her boyfriend. Unless, perhaps, later they would go out together for a short dinner somewhere nearby or cook something themselves. At least those were her intentions at the time. The girl had no idea what a tragic turn awaited her very soon. If only she had been a little more careful and listened to her family's wariness about John's strange and sometimes jealous behavior. However, at that moment nothing foreshadowed trouble, and Valentina sincerely believed in a happy future with her beloved. Oh, if only it were possible to turn back time and change the course of events. Perhaps now this incredibly talented girl would be alive and continue to share her creativity with the world. But you can't deceive fate, and unfortunately, it measures out much less for some than we would like. The further development of events came as a real shock to everyone present at the court hearing. Valentina's last video call took place at 9 o'clock in the evening, and her closest friend was on the other end. However, as the girl's mother, Laura Hidalgo, recalled, the last person to see Valentina alive during a video call was her younger son, a 13-year-old teenager. He said that at that moment his sister was lying in bed next to her boyfriend John, and the couple looked very happy and carefree. After that conversation, no one from the family contacted Valentina again. At 10:43 p.m. on January 21st, surveillance cameras in the building recorded the young woman in the company of her chosen one for the last time. The footage shows the girl peeking out of the apartment door, with John standing in front of the entrance. The man has a pensive and somewhat agitated look. He nervously paces back and forth down the corridor, occasionally rubbing his face with his palms. At some point, Poulos calls the elevator and goes down, probably to pick up some delivery. The next day, on Sunday, January 22nd at 9 a.m., the same cameras again noticed John. This time he was leaving the apartment holding 2 large bags of garbage in his hands. But for some reason, Valentina was nowhere to be seen. Poulos headed to the parking lot, opened a silver car, and put the bags in the back seat. Then he returned to the apartment, and a few minutes later came out of there with 2 suitcases, which he also loaded into the trunk. Having done this, he went back upstairs again. The clock showed 10 in the morning when John once again left the apartment. Now he had a huge suitcase covered with a grey blanket in his hands. He placed it on a delivery cart. Next to it was another separate bag. At that time, no one knew that under the blanket was actually Valentina's body, with her head sticking out of the suitcase. Once in the parking lot, Poulos began to look around, as if checking if there were any witnesses nearby. After making sure that there was no one around, he took a few steps forward and looked again to make sure that no one was coming down in the elevator. Then the man quickly returned to the car. After looking around one last time and taking a few sips of water from a bottle, John, with great effort, lifted the heavy suitcase and almost threw it into the trunk. The bag followed. After closing the compartment, Poulos got behind the wheel and quickly drove away. Could anyone have imagined what a horrifying cargo that man was transporting? Hardly. But facts are stubborn things, and all these disturbing events captured by surveillance cameras later became key evidence in the investigation of the brutal murder of a talented girl. How many questions her relatives, friends, and acquaintances had, and the main one among them was why. For what reason did someone so mercilessly cut short Valentina's life, who was just beginning to flourish and conquer new heights? Believe me, the answer to this question shocked even the most experienced investigators. Throughout the day, around noon, the suspect's car was repeatedly caught on surveillance cameras at various points in Bogotá. It seemed that the man was looking for a suitable place to get rid of the suitcase with its terrible contents. At about 3:00 p.m., a silver sedan drove into the territory of one of the city parks and stopped near the garbage cans. At this moment, the driver got out of the car and headed towards the dumpster. He nervously looked around, as if checking if anyone had noticed him. After making sure that there were no witnesses nearby, the man took a suitcase out of the trunk, which, judging by his efforts, was quite heavy. Lifting the suitcase, he quickly approached the bin and threw it inside. Then he returned to the car and pulled out a bag from there, which he also got rid of by throwing it into the dumpster. Having dealt with this, the stranger latched the lid of the container and hastily walked away. The further out of the car lay in a western direction, and the final destination turned out to be the international airport of El Dorado. It was there at 4:30 p.m.,
that John Poulos was last seen by surveillance cameras. After that, his trail was lost, at least for a while. The next day, on Monday, January 23rd, the Colombian Ministry of Security announced a $1 million reward for any information that would help find the person or persons involved in the murder of Valentina Trespalacios. At the same time, the Colombian law enforcement agencies officially appealed to Interpol with a request to put Poulos on the international wanted list. And there were good reasons for this. John suddenly fled the country without explaining the reasons for such an act, and he was also the last person to contact the girl on the night of her disappearance. And then, on the evening of January 24th, encouraging news came from Panamanian colleagues. That day, the National Police of Panama reported that they had managed to detain Poulos at the Tocumen International Airport. The suspect was trying to board a flight to Turkey, but was apprehended by law enforcement. The Colombian authorities immediately began the process of extraditing John in order to interrogate him and get answers about Valentina's death. More than 14 experienced specialists in the field of forensic science and operational search activities joined the investigation of this high-profile case. Thanks to the coordinated work under the coordination of the Prosecutor General's Office of Colombia, more than 300 hours of video recordings were sifted through and thoroughly analyzed. All these materials were collected during the intense search and collection of evidence. It would seem that the noose around the suspect had finally tightened. However, there was still a lot of work ahead for the investigators. After all, it was not enough to simply detain the alleged killer. It was necessary to gather irrefutable evidence of his guilt and establish a motive for committing this horrific crime. And something told the detectives that the answers to these questions might turn out to be much more terrifying than they expected. During the investigation of this intricate case, another important clue unexpectedly appeared. The closest friend of the deceased Valentina, who lived in Cartagena, came to Bogotá to give investigators her laptop. The fact is that on the day of the murder, Valentina used it and forgot to close her WhatsApp account. So all the girls' chats and correspondence remained accessible. And among these messages, the friend noticed something extremely suspicious and creepy. The woman told the detectives that she saw photos in Valentina's correspondence that Poulos had sent her on the day he arrived in Bogotá. In the pictures, the man posed next to his luggage, and here the friend's attention was drawn to one detail. The suitcase that John was carrying with him was very similar to the one in which Valentina's body was later found. Even the color matched. Of course, it was unclear to the investigators why the young woman left her WhatsApp open on her friend's computer. But anyway, these messages and photos became a real find for the police. Thanks to them, law enforcement officers were able to better reconstruct the chronology of events on that fatal day and confirm important details. And these pieces of evidence also became another nail in the coffin of the suspect, John Poulos. Meanwhile, experts completed a forensic medical examination of Valentina's body. Its results shocked even experienced criminalists. It turned out that the cause of the girl's death was mechanical asphyxia. In simple terms, Valentina was strangled by tightly tightening a rope around her neck. Traces of violence inflicted before death were also found on the body. Forensic experts concluded that everything indicated that Valentina was killed in her sleep. This was particularly evidenced by the fact that the girl was wearing night pajamas. It's hard to even imagine what this young woman had to go through in the last minutes of her life. Well, let's summarize all these facts and circumstances. The evidence gathered by the investigation unequivocally pointed to the involvement of one particular man in this horrific crime, John Poulos. Firstly, he flew to Bogotá on the same day that Valentina was last seen alive. Secondly, in the couple's correspondence shortly before the murder, the same suitcase appeared in which the girl's mutilated body was later found. Thirdly, John was the last person to contact Valentina before her disappearance. And his strange behavior after the incident, escape from the country, and attempts to cover his tracks only intensified the detectives' suspicions. However, for a complete picture, several key elements were still missing. Investigators understood that they needed to learn more about the suspect's personality, his possible motives and psychological profile, and it was also necessary to explain some unclear details, such as Valentina's mysterious message to the taxi driver. The further development of events exceeded our wildest assumptions. When the suspect John Poulos was officially charged, he did not plead guilty to the intentional murder of Valentina with aggravating circumstances and concealing evidence. Instead, he began to claim that during his detention in Panama, law enforcement officers made procedural violations as they did not provide him with the opportunity to talk to a lawyer. Quite a cunning position, isn't it? The court hearing in this case lasted more than 5 hours. Poulos even had to be provided with an interpreter, as his knowledge of Spanish was extremely limited. And yet, despite attempts to deny his guilt, John Poulos remained the main suspect in this terrible crime. All the evidence pointed to his involvement. Firstly, he was the last person to see Valentina alive. Secondly, immediately after her disappearance, Poulos tried to flee the country, deleting all his social media profiles. Why? Perhaps he hoped to get rid of traces and avoid responsibility in this way. By the way, it turned out that John Nelson Poulos, born in 1987, was originally from Wisconsin, USA. In his homeland, he had already been married and had 3 children. However, the marriage ended in divorce. Moreover, Poulos' ex-wife even obtained a court restraining order against him related to domestic violence. Well, it seems that the suspect's strange behavior and propensity for cruelty have long-standing roots. Another telling detail. Another woman with whom Poulos corresponded online and even sent money told the investigation interesting things. According to her, John spent about 5-6 hours a day browsing adult sites. She also noted that in communication he behaved unpredictably. Sometimes he pretended to be a gentleman and then suddenly turned into a completely different personality. And he also loved to fantasize about strange topics. By the way, another girl from an online models page who was familiar with Poulos added an illustrative testimony. Once she stopped responding to John's messages after he made a creepy remark, mentioning jealousy and murder. Literally, it sounded like this. "If you were in a bar and I came there, would you talk to me?" The girl refused him, to which Poulos replied something like that was a sufficient reason for murder out of jealousy. The witness emphasized, although John sent her money, signing as a magic lord, she never communicated with him via video call. However, even correspondence with Poulos was full of oddities. You know, John had a clear behavioral pattern in his relationships with victims. With Valentina, he also met online and then began to persistently send her money and gifts. In this way, Poulos created the illusion of a bought right of ownership and tried to make the girl dependent on him. Unfortunately, women often do not notice these alarming signs. After all, at first, such attention may seem pleasant, especially for trusting victims. But predators like Poulos act exactly like this. First, they win over with money and attention, and then begin to treat their partner as an object. However, this time the criminal made a fatal mistake, and the law finally caught up with him. By the way, the investigation put forward an interesting version regarding Poulos' motives. It seems that John was convinced that the garbage disposal system in Colombia works the same way as in the USA.
They say that waste is simply collected in containers and then taken somewhere to a landfill. However, Poulos did not take into account the local realities because in Colombia, the poor and homeless often visit garbage dumps in search of things that can be sold or used. So all of John's plans to hide the body in a suitcase among the waste failed miserably. Currently, the suspect is being held in a solitary confinement cell in the capital's prison in Bogotá. The prosecutor's office continues to gather evidence of his guilt and is looking for additional details that will help to fully reconstruct the picture of this horrific crime. Of course, there is still a lot of work ahead. After all, it is necessary not only to prove Poulos' guilt, but also to find out what exactly pushed him to this terrible act. By the way, Colombian law provides for up to 50 years in prison for premeditated murder. This is the punishment that John Poulos may receive if his guilt is proven. For their part, law enforcement officers are making every effort to achieve justice. A special group formed by the capital's police under the leadership of the Prosecutor General's office is carefully working on the search and systematization of evidence. After all, now that the main suspect is behind bars, they have a huge responsibility to do everything so that he can never harm any woman again. This story is a vivid example of the risks that can be hidden behind new acquaintances on the internet. Unfortunately, many people like Valentina do not initially notice the alarming signs and sincerely believe that they have found a kindred spirit and the love of their life. Few people think that something bad can happen to them. However, experience eloquently proves the opposite to us. So be vigilant and careful when trusting little-known people. After all, sometimes a real monster can hide behind the mask of a prince. This horrific event took place on Christmas Eve 2022 in the town of Swilge, located on the outskirts of Liverpool, United Kingdom. The main character of this story is 26-year-old Elle Edwards, a young and attractive girl who worked as a cosmetologist in a local beauty salon and assisted a dermatologist. Elle was a true gem of her town. Her beauty and charm captivated everyone around her,
and her kindness and positivity allowed her to find common ground even with the most demanding clients. This girl was not only beautiful on the outside, but also incredibly talented in her field. Thanks to her hard work and determination, she became a first-class specialist in her areas of expertise. Elle always greeted her clients with a sincere smile, radiating joy and optimism. It seemed that everything in this girl's life was going as well as possible. She relentlessly pursued her goals and dreams, building a successful career. But despite her busy schedule, Elle never forgot about her family. She was especially looking forward to Christmas because this year her sister Lucy was supposed to fly in from faraway Dubai. Just imagine how important this reunion with her beloved sister was for Elle. She couldn't wait for her arrival, planning how they would celebrate New Year's and Christmas together. After all, it is in such moments that we feel the value of family bonds and the warmth of loved ones most acutely. But unfortunately, this story will not have a happy ending. What was supposed to be a joyful celebration turned into a real nightmare. On December 24, 2022, Elle went to a local pub with her friends to celebrate Christmas while waiting for Lucy's arrival. They had no idea that this night would be fatal for them. As an experienced detective, I have encountered similar cases more than once. Even in the brightest moments of our lives, evil may be lurking nearby, and while we carelessly celebrate, someone may be planning the most terrible things. This is exactly what happened on that Christmas night in Ole Swilge when someone's bloody revenge destroyed the life of an innocent girl and her loved ones. Elle Edwards and her girlfriends decided to celebrate the long-awaited reunion with a bang. They chose the local pub, the Lighthouse, for this, where they planned to have a fun time while waiting for the arrival of Elle's sister Lucy. The girls could not even imagine that this night would turn into a real nightmare for them. The pub was filled with an atmosphere of joy and carefree fun. Elle and her friends laughed, danced, and sang karaoke, enjoying the festive mood. They were so caught up in the merriment that they did not notice how a person who had nothing to do with kindness and mercy appeared nearby. The Christmas idol was shattered at 23:50 when an alarming call came into the rescue service. Witnesses reported that at least 12 shots were fired at the exit of the pub. And worst of all, 2 bullets hit Elle directly. One of them seriously wounded the girl in the head. The dispatcher immediately sent emergency services to the scene. Medics urgently arrived at the pub and, having loaded Elle into an ambulance, rushed to the local hospital. They did everything possible to save the girl's life, but unfortunately, her injuries were incompatible with life. Elle died on the way to the hospital. When the police informed the family of the deceased about the tragedy, it came as a real shock to them. No one could believe that this could happen to their beloved Elle. This girl was the epitome of kindness, beauty, and joy. She had many friends, and it seemed that she could not have enemies capable of such cruelty. As an experienced detective, I understood that the investigation of this crime would not be easy. In the early stages, the investigators had no leads. The attacker appeared out of nowhere, committed his bloody massacre, and disappeared just as without a trace, leaving only shell casings and Elle's lifeless body behind. The nature of the attack indicated that it was carefully planned. The criminal thought out every step, not leaving his victim any chance of salvation. But the question that haunted us was whether Elle was the real target of the attack. Or perhaps she became an accidental victim of some madman. When I heard what happened next, my breath caught in my throat from the tension. An unknown car stopped at the entrance to the pub, and a few minutes later, the shooting began. In addition to the deceased, 4 more men received gunshot wounds of varying degrees of severity. All of them were young people aged 22 to 33 who were spending time at the establishment that evening and lived in nearby suburbs. The police initially leaned towards the version that the murdered woman was an accidental victim. It was known that criminal groups periodically operated here, and the shooting probably became an ordinary showdown between their members. However, all this was just speculation that needed to be proven or disproven during the investigation, so the detectives studied the victim's personality in more detail. Elle's father, named Tim, was shocked by what happened. Just a few hours before the murder, he spoke with his daughter on the phone. They had a nice conversation and discussed the packing of Christmas gifts that Tim was doing. Like the witnesses of the crime, the victim's relatives did not think who could have wished for Elle's death. The girl seemed to have no ill wishes or enemies who could be capable of such horrors. The detectives decided to interview other witnesses and victims of the unknown criminal's bullets. In addition, law enforcement officers requested video surveillance footage from the pub owner. It was necessary to talk to dozens of people and analyze several hours of video recording. Friends, a very important point: the creation of such content requires a lot of time, and now my channel and I are going through a difficult financial situation. I will be immensely grateful to you if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation. And in return, I will be able to personally respond to you in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors, I will be immensely grateful to you. Eyewitnesses reported that shortly before the shooting, an unknown car stopped at the entrance to the pub. And just a few minutes later,
Shots rang out, taking the life of Elle and injuring 4 more young men. These guys, aged 22 to 33, just like Elle, were simply spending time at the Lighthouse pub on that fatal evening. They did not even suspect that they would become victims of a brutal attack. All the injured were local residents who lived in the nearest suburbs of Ole Swilj. At the beginning of the investigation, we had a version that
Elle could have been an accidental victim of the shooting. The fact is that this was not the calmest area of the city. Local criminal groups periodically operated here, so the first thought was that the shooting could be related to a showdown between gangs. But as an experienced detective, I'll say that it's not worth jumping to conclusions. These were just guesses that needed careful verification. Therefore, the cops began to study in more detail the personality of the deceased girl to understand if she could have enemies capable of such a terrible crime. The investigators decided to question other witnesses of the tragedy and victims of the unknown shooter's bullets. Perhaps one of them noticed something important that could shed light on this dark story. Also, law enforcement requested video surveillance footage from the pub owner. This was a chance to track the movement of the criminal and understand how he ended up near the lighthouse on that fatal night. Even with my experience working in the police, I was stunned by what happened next. Pay attention to some details regarding the car that the criminal was driving. This information turned out to be quite contradictory because witnesses of the event described the vehicle differently. Due to the darkness and panic, it was extremely difficult to see anything specific. However, after a thorough analysis of all the testimonies, the most likely version was a dark-colored Mercedes A-Class. And this guess was confirmed when the police studied the footage from external video surveillance cameras. An interesting fact was that the killer did not immediately open fire on the visitors of the pub. At first, he drove into the parking lot and for some time simply observed what was happening inside the establishment. It seemed that the attacker was waiting for something or someone. From the place where he stopped the car, there was an excellent view of the entrance to the pub and most of the premises. Obviously, the attacker was waiting for the most opportune moment for his bloody attack, and that moment came when Elle appeared on the street. The criminal quickly jumped out of the car, fired 12 shots into the crowd, and then just as quickly returned to the driver's seat and disappeared in an unknown direction. After a thorough study of all the surveillance camera recordings, the investigators came to an important conclusion: the attacker acted alone. There were no signs that anyone was helping him. Unfortunately, it was not possible to track the exact escape route of the criminal. Therefore, the police had to resort to a large-scale door-to-door survey. They talked to every resident of the neighborhood, describing the car and the circumstances of the crime, hoping to obtain at least some lead that would help identify the killer. Patrolling the streets of Ole Swilj took place around the clock, and these efforts were not in vain. Just 2 days after the shooting, detectives managed to detain 2 suspects at once. The police immediately informed the public and the media about this, but the names of the detainees were not disclosed until all the circumstances of the case were fully clarified. The only thing that became known was that the suspects were a 30-year-old man and a 19-year-old girl, but the investigation failed to prove their involvement in this terrible crime. During searches in the homes of the detainees, the weapon from which people were shot at near the pub was not found. Even now, as I'm telling you about this, I feel goosebumps running down my spine. After unsuccessful attempts to detain the real perpetrators of this terrible crime, the local police decided to make an official statement. They assured the public that they would not rest until the unknown shooter was behind bars and brought to justice. This statement was intended to at least slightly reassure the local residents of Ole Swilj, who were extremely outraged by the rampant crime on the streets of their city and the obvious powerlessness of the authorities. People felt unprotected and left to fend for themselves. Meanwhile, during the investigation, a new version emerged regarding the possible reasons for the attack. It was assumed that the shooting in the Lighthouse pub could be due to enmity between local gangster groups, and Elle, in this case, was just an accidental victim who simply found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, it is worth noting that at that moment, these were only guesses that required thorough verification. The investigators had yet to find strong evidence that would confirm or refute this version. During further investigation, it was established that the potential targets of the shooter that night could have been Jake Duffy and Kieran Seld, members of one of the local gangs who were also relaxing in the pub on that ill-fated evening. As it turned out, these two had been in a fierce confrontation with another criminal group for a long time, which was trying to establish control over this part of the city. So it is quite likely that it was this enmity that could have caused the bloody massacre. On December 29, law enforcement officers managed to detain another suspect in this case. But as in the case with those previously arrested, it was not possible to prove his involvement in the shooting. The man had a reliable alibi that completely excluded him from the circle of suspects in the commission of this particular crime. However, the detectives assumed that the detainee could have been involved in organizing the attack. Perhaps he played the role of an accomplice or a spotter, but it was extremely difficult to prove this. Around the same time, the investigation finally managed to identify the car that the shooter was driving. It turned out to be a dark Mercedes that the criminal left in the parking lot near the pub. True, due to the lack of direct evidence, the name of the owner of this car was also not disclosed. But finding this car was not so easy. Detectives had to carefully study the footage from numerous video cameras. What happened next can only be compared to the plot of a high-octane thriller. At the time when it seemed that the investigation had reached a dead end, an event occurred that could have been a real breakthrough in this intricate case. On December 31, the police received a report of a fire that happened very close to the place where the attack on the visitors of the pub was committed. When our colleagues arrived at the call, they saw a shocking picture, a dark Mercedes, which according to the description of witnesses, very much resembled the car of the criminals, was completely engulfed in flames. The vehicle was burning like a torch, and it was clear that it could no longer be saved. This was a real blow to the investigation. After all, not only possible material evidence that could shed light on the identities of the attackers burned in the fire, but also perhaps the murder weapon itself. The experts could only throw up their hands. The chances of finding something valuable after such a fire were practically zero. Of course, the detectives immediately suspected that this was an intentional arson. The criminals, apparently, felt that the police were getting close to revealing their identities and decided to destroy all possible evidence of their involvement in this bloody massacre. However, even despite the fact that the fire left almost no traces, forensic scientists still managed to establish one important detail: this Mercedes was used during the attack on the pub. True, the car itself did not belong to the criminals, but was stolen shortly before the tragic events of Christmas night. Such a brazen attempt to hide traces only confirmed the investigators' guesses that representatives of the criminal world were behind the shooting. It is quite likely that the arson was only one of the elements of a carefully planned operation to eliminate competitors. It would seem that after this, the investigation would again find itself at a dead end. But on January 11, a real breakthrough occurred. Two suspects in this case were delivered to the police station at once. They turned out to be a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman who were detained in central Wales. The young man, who was called Connor Chapman, was of particular interest to the detectives. Why? Because he was already well known to law enforcement officers for his criminal biography. Over the past 5 years before the murder of Elle Edwards, Chapman managed to light up in numerous offenses and crimes. Connor started, like many others, with minor violations of the law. But over time, his appetites grew, and he plunged deeper and deeper into the criminal swamp. It seemed that this guy was not going to stop there at all, and in every possible way sought to establish himself in the status of a reckless criminal. The detention of Chapman certainly added optimism to the investigation. It only remained to hope that the interrogation of this suspect would finally provide answers to the questions that had been haunting all of Ole Swilge for so long. After all, every resident of this small town wanted only one thing: that those guilty of the death of innocent Elle would be brought to justice. I almost fell off my chair when I heard what happened next. I would like to focus your attention on the personality of one of the main suspects, Connor Chapman. His biography is a prime example of how a person can find himself on the wrong path and eventually slide to the very bottom of the criminal world. As it became known from police archives, one of Connor's first serious crimes was car theft. And this was not an ordinary theft. The guy committed this crime under aggravating circumstances. That is, from the very beginning of his criminal career, Chapman acted boldly and uncompromisingly. Later, his name began to appear in case files about robberies, hooliganism, and threats. It seemed that this young man was simply incapable of living according to the law and received some kind of perverse pleasure from violating all possible rules and norms. Once Connor even became a participant in a real Hollywood-style chase. Fleeing from the police, he abandoned the stolen car and tried to hide in the bushes. And even when he was caught up and detained by law enforcement officers, this young criminal managed to make a surprised face and declare that he did not understand at all what the chase in question was about. According to him, he was just waiting in those bushes for his friend. Chapman's cynicism knew no bounds. But it was this very adventure that made him truly famous. The press started talking about the desperate guy. His name
flashed on the front pages of local newspapers. Interestingly, Connor grew up in Birkenhead, a suburb of Liverpool, under the care of his grandmother and grandfather. His parents left the boy in early childhood, so the elderly relatives had to take care of raising their grandson. Despite all their efforts, Connor embarked on a criminal path early. Chapman's problems with the law began in his teens. He dropped out of school shortly before the final exams, although to be honest, no one had any particular hopes for him. The guy had always studied poorly and was considered a problem child. Connor first found himself in the dock in 2014 when he was only 14. Then he was accused of shoplifting. Who knows, maybe it was the lenient sentence for this crime that inspired the teenager to further offenses. Already in 2016, Chapman again came to the attention of law enforcement. This time he was caught during another car theft. The guy was detained right in the stolen car, behind the wheel of which he was without a license and insurance. Moreover, by his actions, Connor violated the conditions of the previous sentence, according to which he was released early. Another year passed, and in 2017 Chapman distinguished himself again. This time, in addition to the traditional car theft, there was also the possession of prohibited psychotropic substances. And again, the guy ignored all the prohibitions and warnings, because at that time he was already under police supervision. The denouement of this story turned out to be so shocking that I still can't find the words to describe my emotions. As a result of his illegal actions, the guy was banned from visiting several areas of the city. He was clearly ordered not to appear in public places, because with his behavior he posed a real threat to others. But could such bans stop Connor? Already the next year, 2018, he again came to the attention of the police when he was detained during a patrol, and again in a public place and with weapons and prohibited substances. It's hard to believe that this guy had barely turned 18 at the time. It was then that Connor Chapman's name first hit the pages of newspapers. This happened after his next attempt to escape from law enforcement officers in a stolen car. Patrolmen noticed a local Audi on the street that was moving with violations. They immediately demanded that the driver stop and get out of the car with his hands raised. But Connor was not going to give up so easily. He sharply pressed on the gas and began to flee, provoking a real chase in the style of action movies. During this crazy race, the young criminal managed to violate, it seems, all possible traffic rules. Chapman constantly exceeded the speed limit, accelerating to 80 km/h where the maximum allowed speed was 30. He repeatedly drove into the oncoming lane, risking not only his own life, but also the safety of other road users. The finale of this story was quite expected. Unable to cope with the control on the next maneuver, Connor crashed into the curb. From a strong impact, the car was turned around and thrown to the side of the road. The hapless driver himself miraculously managed to get out of the mangled car unharmed. But his adventures that day did not end there. Jumping out of the wrecked car, Connor rushed headlong to flee, trying to hide from the police and the roadside bushes. However, this did not help him. The patrol officers caught up with the fugitive after only a few hundred meters. And even in this seemingly hopeless situation, Chapman managed to wriggle out. When he was being detained, the guy stated with an absolutely sincere look that he was just waiting in those bushes for his buddy. Of course, no one believed this excuse. His lie was too obvious. During the trial, Connor's lawyer tried to justify his client, claiming that he simply fell under the harmful influence of older comrades. Like Chapman himself is not a bad person who should not be thrown behind bars, but released to freedom, giving a chance to reform. The defender even stated that his client allegedly had attention deficit disorder and a whole bunch of other mental disorders. However, all these tricks did not help. The court found Connor guilty on all charges. The motive for the murder was as simple as a door. It was competition between two local gangs. Connor simply blindly killed an innocent person to satisfy the needs of the gang who were dividing this territory at the time, and after which he was supposed to go to Spain to cover his tracks. This scoundrel was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to early release after 48 years. The guy also received a ban on driving a car, which was in effect after his release. Thus, the novice criminal achieved 14 convictions for 30 criminal episodes by the time he reached the age of majority. Obviously, he was not going to change and categorically refused to fit into society. Everyone understood that he was potentially dangerous, but there were no legal grounds for isolating him from the father of the murdered woman. Announced his desire to organize a fund to support victims similar to his daughter. He believed that the main goal would be to fight for a reduction in the number of weapons in the hands of civilians. The bereaved man wanted this tragic accident to become a lesson and help save the lives of the same innocent people in the future.
This is Holly Bobo, a 20-year-old girl from Tennessee who was on the brink of a new life. She was about to finish her studies and dedicate herself to the noble profession of nursing. It seemed like nothing could overshadow her future until one April day in 2011, she vanished without a trace. Her brother was the last person to see Holly alive. According to him, he witnessed a strange scene. Holly was talking to an unknown man in their home's garage. This stranger, whose face remains in the shadows to this day, grabbed the girl and forcibly took her to the nearest forest. I can only imagine the horror that gripped Holly at that moment. Despite a quick call to the police, it was too late. By the time law enforcement arrived at the scene, the perpetrator had already managed to disappear with his victim. A race against time began in which, unfortunately, the criminal proved to be more cunning. Holly, a native of the quiet town, was a true child of nature. Countless photos show her in camouflage together with her family as they explore the local forests and hills. Nature was her second home, but despite her love for outdoor activities, Holly was not a very sociable person. At her core, she was rather shy and reserved. But this quiet exterior hid an unwavering inner confidence. She knew exactly who she was and what she wanted out of life. Everyone asked themselves the question, what really happened to Holly on that fateful April morning? And will the truth ever be revealed? I will tell you all about it right now, but traditionally only to those wonderful and incredible people who right now will subscribe to the channel, like this video, and write any comment to promote this video. These 3 simple actions will help conscious people find and watch this video and realize what problems exist in society and what should always be paid attention to. Holly grew up in the small town of Darden, Tennessee, with a population of just over 3,000 residents. It was a quiet, cozy corner, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. An ideal place to raise children and enjoy a peaceful life. As a detective, I have seen many towns, but Darden immediately captured my heart with its simplicity and sincerity. Locals were proud that Darden was a middle-class stronghold. Crime here was at a record low, and the cost of living allowed even middle-income families to feel comfortable. All the ingredients for a happy life were in Darden: safety, tranquility, proximity to nature. No wonder Holly loved her hometown so much. But despite her devotion to Darden, Holly had ambitious plans for the future. She was studying at a college in neighboring Parsons at the University of Tennessee's Nursing Center. It was a small but cozy building where several hundred young and eager students like Holly diligently mastered the basics of medicine. Parsons, although larger than Darden, was also a fairly quiet town. But for students, everything they needed was here: quality education, a friendly atmosphere, and even a few shops where they could have fun after stressful classes. Holly felt like a fish in water here. By the way, what Holly valued most was the opportunity to escape from the noisy city life. Parsons was a quiet haven for her, where she could focus on her studies and her dreams. And although she enjoyed spending time with her family in Darden, Parsons gave her a sense of freedom and independence, so necessary for growing up. The short distance between Darden and Parsons allowed Holly to easily combine her studies and family life. She could devote time to classes without sacrificing warm family moments. It seemed like she had the perfect life: loving parents, close relationships with her brother, and a promising future. As an experienced detective, I have seen many examples of how crime can shake even the most peaceful towns. But it was hard to imagine anything bad in Darden and Parsons. But despite the apparent idyll, danger lurked very close. And when it finally struck, no one was ready. Not Holly's family, not the residents of Darden, not law enforcement. Holly's disappearance was a blow from which the town took a long time to recover. After all, if this could happen to Holly, a girl everyone knew and loved, then no one was safe. Now, looking back, it's easy to see the alarming signs. But then, in those carefree days, no one could have imagined that Holly's life was about to change forever. And with it, the lives of everyone who knew and loved her. On the fateful morning of April 13, 2011, nothing foreshadowed trouble. Holly woke up early around 4:30 to prepare for an important exam. She didn't know that this was the last normal morning of her life. The last hours of carefree existence before her world turned upside down. Around 7:30, Holly received a call from her boyfriend, Drew Scott. He had just returned from hunting turkeys in his grandparents' backyard. It was a usual morning for Drew, while for Holly it was to be a fateful one. None of them could have imagined the tragedy that was looming at the time. At that point, Holly's parents had already left for work, and her brother Clint was still sleeping in his room. The house was immersed in morning silence, which was about to be shattered by terrible events. Around 7:40, just 12 minutes after talking to Drew, Holly made her last call. She didn't know yet that these were her last minutes of freedom. From that moment on, all of Holly's calls and messages went unanswered. Drew, who was used to being in constant contact with his girlfriend, began to worry a lot. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't even imagine the scale of the tragedy. The alarm was heightened by reports from neighbors about screams coming from Holly's house. A young man who lived nearby with his parents heard the commotion and immediately called his mother, and she in turn decided to warn Holly's mother. No one could understand then that behind these screams was something much more terrible than an ordinary quarrel. As it turned out later, these calls proved to be fatal. If someone had immediately rushed to Holly's aid or called the police, perhaps the tragedy could have been avoided. But at that moment, no one could comprehend the magnitude of the danger. Every lost minute brought Holly closer to a terrible denouement. Listening to the details of this case from my colleagues, I couldn't get rid of the thought, what if someone had reacted earlier? What if someone had listened to their instincts and intervened? Maybe they wouldn't be mourning the lost life of a young girl. But the past cannot be changed. All that remains is to learn from bitter lessons and do everything to prevent such tragedies from happening again. I don't know if Holly could have been saved because, analyzing all the events, I feel like the criminal carefully planned everything. But I do know that her story shocked not only me, but also my colleagues, which is actually rare. Meanwhile, Holly's brother, Clint, had just woken up from the barking and growling of the family dogs. Alarmed, he jumped up to see what was going on. Running to the window, Clint saw a strange scene. Holly was talking to some stranger near the family garage. This scene immediately aroused his suspicions. Looking closer, Clint noticed that the stranger was oddly similar to Drew, Holly's boyfriend. At first, he even thought it was really Drew, but something about the situation seemed wrong. They were walking back and forth, clearly arguing about something, but Clint couldn't make out a single word. The only thing he could understand was that Holly was incredibly upset. Her voice sounded broken, but she hardly said anything. Instead, the man was talking almost the entire time, his voice tense and angry. The only thing Clint could make out was how Holly firmly said no at one point and then began asking why. While Clint was watching this scene, his mother called him. He recounted to her in detail everything he saw. Clint speculated that Holly and Drew were probably breaking up, and it was all happening in their garage. He had no idea that his sister was in danger. How bitterly he later regretted this mistake. But then Holly's mother said something that made Clint's blood run cold. It wasn't Drew. She ordered Clint to shoot the stranger immediately. Clint was shocked. He still couldn't clearly see the man, but he was sure it was Drew. How could anyone expect him to shoot his sister's boyfriend? If only Clint had realized earlier that his sister was in trouble. If only he had acted more decisively, maybe things would have turned out differently. But at that moment, he simply couldn't believe that Holly was in danger in their own home, at the hands of a person he mistook for her boyfriend. I feel sorry for how often we don't notice obvious signs of danger, because they seem too incredible, too scary to be true. We dismiss the alarming bells, hoping for the best until it's too late. Of course, it's easy to judge in hindsight. But I'm sure Clint curses himself every day for that fatal mistake. He will have to live with this burden for the rest of his life. Clint, still not believing his ears, asked his mother in despair, "Do you really want me to shoot Drew?" This question seemed to only enrage her even more. She simply hung up, leaving Clint completely bewildered, and dialed 911 instead. As it turned out later, this call was a fatal mistake. Holly's mother was calling from her work number, so she was connected to the police department of another county. Every lost minute gave the perpetrator more time to cover his tracks and escape with Holly. This bureaucratic confusion cost them precious time. While Clint was trying to figure out what was happening, events were unfolding at lightning speed. He ran to the window again, but it was too late. The stranger and Holly had already gotten into the car and disappeared in the direction of the nearest forest. Clint felt his heart sink. He knew that something had gone terribly wrong. It was only at this moment that Clint finally realized that the man he saw could not be Drew. He was much taller and more muscular. But due to the distance and in the semi-darkness, Clint still couldn't get a good look at him. He tried to call Holly, although he knew the chances of an answer were slim. And indeed, she did not answer. Meanwhile, Clint's mother, realizing her mistake with the call, contacted him again. She admitted that she had failed to reach the right police department and begged Clint to do it himself. Without wasting a second, Clint grabbed a shotgun and ran out into the yard. And then his gaze fell on something that made his blood run cold. Red spots were visible on the ground near the garage. Spots that were almost certainly Holly's blood. At that moment, the full horror of the situation finally gripped Clint. He realized that his sister was in terrible danger, and every second counted. With trembling hands, he dialed 911 and described the situation as clearly as possible. But even with all the desire, it took the police about 10 minutes to get to the remote Bobo family home. And in those 10 minutes, Holly and her abductor were long gone. Frankly, I can't help but think about how many opportunities to stop this tragedy were lost due to unfortunate misunderstandings and fatal coincidences. If only Clint had realized the danger earlier, if only the call had immediately reached the right department, if only the police had arrived even a few minutes earlier, maybe things would have turned out differently. I'll tell you how it is. We need to learn to trust our instincts, act quickly and decisively when we hear a cry for help. And no less important, we must ensure that our emergency response system works like clockwork, without delays and failures. Because believe me, when life is at stake, every second is precious. As soon as Holly was declared missing, the police launched a large-scale search. They combed every corner of the city and its environs, hoping to find at least some trace that would lead them to the girl or her abductor. But unfortunately, all their efforts were in vain. It seemed as if the earth had opened up and swallowed Holly without a trace. In a desperate attempt to find a clue, the police requested records of Holly's phone conversations. They hoped they could track her location using GPS data from her mobile phone. And indeed, this yielded the first fruits. They quickly determined that immediately after the abduction, Holly's phone was heading towards the woods near her house, exactly where, according to Clint, the car with Holly and her abductor had gone. Further traces led to Interstate 40, where Holly's phone stopped briefly. And then someone made a call from her number, and the phone started moving again, this time in the opposite direction, as if someone was deliberately trying to confuse the trail. I immediately suspected that this was an attempt by the kidnapper to divert suspicion and throw up smokescreens. An investigative team was immediately dispatched to the place where the last call was made. They hoped to find Holly there, or at least some evidence that would indicate her whereabouts, but they were bitterly disappointed. After a thorough search, they returned empty-handed, no trace of Holly, no clue as to where she might have disappeared. It was a dead end that threatened the investigation from the very beginning. In this situation, the police decided to rely on Clint's testimony, the only person who had caught a glimpse of the kidnapper. The young man described him as a tall, stocky man, about 6 feet tall and weighing under 200 pounds. Dark hair, a baseball cap, mossy oak camouflage, that's all Clint remembered. No special marks, no clues that could lead to the criminal's trail. Only a deep, loud voice, so loud that Clint could hear it even from a distance. The description provided by Clint seemed quite detailed at first glance. But as it turned out, in towns like Parsons, where hunting and outdoor recreation were commonplace, practically every second man fit this description. Height about 6 feet, weight under 200 pounds, dark hair, a baseball cap, and mossy oak camouflage within a 30-mile radius of the town, there were plenty of them. This negated any attempt to compile an accurate portrait of the suspect. But the police were not going to give up. They sent out search parties throughout Parsons and the surrounding area, hoping to stumble upon some evidence or witnesses that could help the investigation, and their efforts were not in vain. Very soon, Holly's personal belongings began to be found all over the town. Here and there, someone would come across her breakfast box, a receipt with her name on it, a postcard from the college where she was studying, as if someone had deliberately scattered them to mock the police and the girl's relatives. Moreover, according to some reports, even Holly's cell phone and her SIM card were found in the town, although other sources claimed that these items, as well as the college postcard, were found in the woods near the Bobo home. In any case, these findings only confirmed the worst fears. Holly had not simply disappeared, she had become the victim of a brutal crime. The first person to come under suspicion was a local resident named Terry Britt, and no wonder Terry already had a criminal record and perfectly fit the description given by Clint. The investigators took him very seriously. They wiretapped his house, checked every corner of his possessions. But for better or worse, they found nothing suspicious. In the end, for lack of evidence, Britt had to be released. Days, weeks, months passed. And then years. It seemed that the Holly Bobo case had reached an impasse. No progress, no new leads. The girl's family still hoped for a miracle, but with each passing day, that hope faded. And then suddenly, in the fall of 2014, the unexpected happened. A group of mushroom pickers scouring the woods near Interstate 40 stumbled upon something terrifying. They immediately called the police, and then, unfortunately, only a few years later, the worst fears were confirmed. Among the autumn leaves and branches lay skeletal remains. Examination showed that these were the remains of Holly Bobo,
who had disappeared 3 years earlier. I can't even imagine what Holly's family felt when they heard this news. 3 years of uncertainty, 3 years of hope, and then such a terrible denouement. It's something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And although this discovery finally provided an answer to the question of what happened to Holly, it also meant that this investigation was no longer just a disappearance. Now it was a murder investigation. Of course, as soon as Holly's remains were found, the case took on a new scope. It would seem that the police had a new lead, a new chance to stumble upon the killer's trail. But as is often the case, it turned out to be not so simple. The place where the remains were found was popular with mushroom pickers and hunters. Hundreds of people could have passed through it over the course of 3 years, trampling potential evidence. Moreover, the wooded area and weather conditions had taken their toll. Most of the traces and prints that could have led to the perpetrator were hopelessly lost. It was another dead end that threatened to bury the truth about Holly's death forever. The place where Holly's remains were found turned out to be a remote patch of forest about 20 miles from her hometown of Darden. At first glance, it seemed an odd choice after all. There were plenty of secluded, deserted places around Darden. Why did the killer take us so far? Perhaps he was afraid that someone might accidentally stumble upon the body somewhere closer to town. When investigators reached out to the owner of this plot, he was not surprised. According to him, despite the remoteness and lack of trails, this place was popular with mushroom pickers. They often wandered these woods without special permission, so it's not surprising that it was the mushroom pickers who eventually stumbled upon Holly's remains. If not for chance, the truth about her fate might never have come to light. When forensic experts began to examine the fine site, a gruesome picture unfolded before them. Holly's bones were scattered over a fairly large area, as if someone or something had deliberately scattered them. But the most terrifying thing was something else. Judging by the hole in the skull, the girl had been killed by a shot to the head, executed in cold blood. It would seem that the discovery of the remains should have been a breakthrough in the investigation. But as it turned out, the police already had a prime suspect in mind and had been hunting him for at least 6 months prior to this. What's most strange is that this man was just one of 6 persons of interest in the Holly Bobo case. Yes, you heard that right, 6. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in this convoluted story. The first arrest in the Holly case took place back in March 2014, several months before her body was found. 3 men, Zach Adams, his brother Dylan, and their friend Jason, were detained on suspicion of involvement in the girl's disappearance. At that time, the investigation did not yet have a body, but there was already evidence of violent actions against Holly. Moreover, the deeper the investigators dug, the more horrifying the picture became. It turned out that before the murder, Holly had been subjected to assault. It's hard to even imagine the horror this young girl had to endure in the last hours of her life. What kind of monsters could commit such an atrocity? But the shock of this revelation was quickly replaced by an even greater shock. After the trio of main suspects were brought in for questioning, police arrested 2 more individuals on suspicion that they had helped hide Holly's body after the murder. It appeared to be an entire criminal gang, and each of them played their own gruesome role in this tragedy. You know, in my years with the police, I've seen a lot of horrible things. But the story of Holly Bobo struck even me with its senseless cruelty, the audacity of the criminals who buried the body in the woods like some kind of garbage, and then led the investigation by the nose for months. It was something out of the most terrifying crime dramas, and at the same time entirely real. But the shocking twist didn't end there. As it later turned out, there was another suspect in this case, but he committed suicide before the police could interrogate him. Such an ominous detail which only added mystery to this whole story. Who is this man? What role did he play in Holly's disappearance? And why did he choose to take his own life rather than answer the investigators' questions? Even more intriguing was the fact that the police never disclosed why these 6 men ended up on the list of suspects. Perhaps it had to do with their past, some long-ago offenses or ties to the criminal world. Or perhaps the investigators simply didn't want to reveal all their cards so as not to harm the investigation. In any case, the details remain shrouded in mystery. The only thing that leaked to the press was that one of the suspects, Dylan Adams, Zach's brother, had previously had problems with the law. Back in 2014, he had been held liable for illegal possession of weapons. Not the best characteristic for a person suspected of involvement in a brutal murder. But of course, this alone was not enough to prove his guilt. During the interrogation, Dylan told something very interesting. He claimed that on the day of Holly's disappearance, he saw her alive at his brother Zach's house. Moreover, according to documents that later became the basis for a search,
Dylan had allegedly witnessed Holly being held at Zach's house on that very April 13, 2011, the day of her disappearance. According to Dylan, he came to his brother's house that day to borrow a truck. But when he went inside, he saw Holly. She was sitting in a chair in the living room and looked very bad. And then something truly horrific happened. Zach allegedly confessed to Dylan that he upped a girl and recorded it all on video. Of course, such a confession should have been a breakthrough in the investigation. But there were two problems. First, the video recording mentioned was never found, as if it had never existed. Second, Dylan himself later recounted his words. He began to claim that the investigators had pressured him and demanded that he slandered his brother. And to be honest, it's not hard to believe some of the details of Dylan's story really didn't fit well with the other evidence in the case. The only thing that confirmed his words was the clothes that Zach was allegedly wearing that day. Dylan mentioned that his brother was in camouflage, and this matched the description given by the witness, Holly's brother Clint. The same description of a tall man in mossy oak camouflage who was talking to Holly in the garage shortly before her disappearance. It seemed that there really was some connection here. Overall, the situation was shaping up to be confusing and ambiguous. On the one hand, the police had serious suspicions about Zach Adams and his inner circle. Something clearly connected these people to Holly's disappearance and murder. But on the other hand, not all the confessions and testimonies seemed reliable. Some might be holding something back, while others might be adding extra details under pressure from the investigation. Unraveling this tangle and getting to the heart of the matter was oh so difficult. I'll be honest, at this stage of the investigation, my own head was spinning. So many versions, so many potential suspects, and yet no direct and unambiguous evidence. It would take a lot of effort and professionalism not to get lost in this maze, to sift the truth from the fiction, and finally bring the perpetrators to justice. And here we come to one of the most mysterious and disturbing details in this whole story. The same video that Dylan mentioned, the video that supposedly captured Zach Adams raping Holly Bobo. Of course, this immediately raised many questions and doubts. Was Dylan telling the truth? Or maybe he made up this story to divert suspicion from himself. Or maybe the video did exist, but someone made sure it disappeared forever. However, even without this video evidence, Dylan's testimony proved weighty enough for the police to take action. Based on his words, 3 main suspects in the case were arrested: Zach Adams, Jason Autry, and Shane Austin. 3 individuals who, according to the investigation, were directly involved in Holly's disappearance and murder. But the most ominous thing about all this was the fact that one of the suspects, Shane Austin, had already taken his own life by that point. He committed suicide before the police could bring official charges against him. Of course, this immediately raised new questions and suspicions. Could Shane not bear the burden of guilt? Or maybe he knew something he shouldn't have, and someone made sure he stayed silent forever. Be that as it may, now that Shane was dead, all eyes were on the other 2 suspects, Zach Adams and Jason Autry. It was their testimony that would now determine whether the investigation would finally be able to piece together a complete picture of what happened to Holly. And then there was another unexpected twist. It seems the police found a way to put pressure on Jason. They made it clear to him. If he didn't cooperate with the investigation, he risked spending the rest of his life behind bars. And I must say, this tactic worked. Soon Jason began to give testimony that seriously implicated Zach Adams. He offered to make a deal, information in exchange for a lighter sentence. And the police seemed ready to make that compromise. It was this moment when Jason began cooperating with the investigation that became a turning point in the entire case. Finally, there was a real chance to find out the truth about what happened to Holly Bobo. It seemed that just a little more, and all the pieces of this gruesome puzzle would fall into place. But as it turned out, not everyone was thrilled with this turn of events. The lawyer for the late Shane Austin reacted particularly sharply. A month before the trial began, he came out with a loud statement, accusing the police of bias and unprofessionalism. According to him, the investigators had no real evidence against Shane, at all just some theories, speculation, and rumors. Moreover, the lawyer claimed that the police had simply harassed Shane, threatened him, made him believe that he was going to be accused of a crime he did not commit. And allegedly, unable to withstand this pressure, Shane decided to take his own life. In fact, Shane's relatives, through their lawyer, accused the police of driving him to suicide. Of course, these statements made quite a stir. Although no official lawsuits were filed against the police, everyone understood that it was only a matter of time. The investigators' reputation was at stake, and if it turned out that they had indeed resorted to illegal methods of pressure, it could call into question the entire course of the investigation. I'll be frank, when I heard about these accusations, I felt quite a bit of unease. Of course, I trusted my colleagues and wanted to believe that they had acted strictly within the law. But I know all too well how dirty this business can be, especially when it comes to high-profile cases that attract the attention of the entire country. Sometimes in the pursuit of results, people can cross the line of what is permissible. And if something like that happened in the case of Shane Austin, it could have very serious consequences. However, no matter what the lawyer said, the fact remained. Shane Austin was dead, and 2 other suspects were in custody. And now everything depended on what Zach Adams and Jason Autry would tell. Finally, in September 2017, Zach Adams stood trial on charges of kidnapping, rape, and murder of Holly Bobo. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for 6 long years. The moment when it seemed that justice might finally be served. But as it turned out, this was only the beginning of new shocking revelations. Zach's defense immediately put forward an unexpected version. They claimed that Clint, Holly's brother, was actually acquainted with the suspects. Moreover, according to them, on the day of Holly's disappearance, Zach, Dylan, and their friend Jason came to the Bobo house, not at all to kidnap the girl. Allegedly, they intended to teach Clint himself to make methamphetamine. Jason, who by that time had already agreed to testify against Zach in exchange for a deal with the prosecution, told even more amazing things. Allegedly, during this lesson, Holly accidentally found out what her brother was doing and was shocked and frightened. So much so that she ran out of the house screaming the same screams that the neighbors heard and which prompted them to call the police. If you believe this version, it turns out that Clint knew a lot more from the beginning than he was saying. He knew what kind of people Zach, Dylan, and Jason were and what they were capable of. That's why he was so reluctant to intervene when he realized Holly was in trouble, because he was afraid for his own skin. And then, according to Jason, this is what happened. When Holly tried to escape, the suspects grabbed her and forcibly shoved her into the car. They took her to some abandoned barn, where they took turns roughing her and then killed her. All so that she would keep quiet about their dark dealings. Of course, this is a very convenient version for Jason, which partially relieves him of responsibility. But there is one problem: Clint categorically denies that anything like that happened in their house that day. And there is no physical evidence to support Jason's words either. So why should the jury believe one criminal accusing another? Doesn't this sound like the usual rumors and slander that thugs resort to in order to save their own skin? And that's not all. If you compare Jason's testimony with what Dylan Adams told, you can see a lot of discrepancies and contradictions. It seems that each of them is telling their own version of events, and with a lot of blank spots and inconsistencies. Therefore, from everything I've heard, I can only draw one more or less reliable conclusion. Most likely, after the kidnapping, Holly was taken to the same barn that Jason mentioned, and there they did something terrible to her. And then when Zach, Dylan, and perhaps Jason himself realized that she was still alive, they decided to get rid of the witness. And Zach, as the ringleader of this gang, took on the role of executioner. He shot Holly in the back of the head, rolled her body up in a carpet, and drove it in his pickup truck to the woods near the highway. And then he threw the gun into a pond somewhere nearby so that the police would never find it. Of course, there is no direct evidence of this. There are only the words of one killer against another. But even that, it seems, was enough for the jury, because when the trial finally took place in September 2017, Zach Adams was found guilty on all counts of kidnapping, rape, and murder. For the totality of crimes, he was given life without the right to parole. His brother Dylan, who allegedly only helped cover up the tracks, got 50 years of which he will actually serve at least 35. As for Jason, who handed over his accomplices, he got off scot-free. The prosecutors dropped all charges against him supposedly. He did not take a direct part in the murder. However, I'm not sure that this is fair. After all, if even half of what these scumbags told about each other is true, then it turns out that they should all be behind bars. Every single one of them, because each of them, to one degree or another, was involved in this atrocity. But unfortunately, justice is not always perfect. And it's not always the one who committed the most serious crime who gets the most severe punishment. Sometimes those who are more guilty turn out to be more cunning than others and know how to divert suspicion from themselves in time by pointing the finger at someone else. Therefore, to be honest, I cannot say with any certainty that the final point has been put in the Holly Bobo case. There are too many dark spots and unclear moments in it, too tangled a web of lies, understatement, and mutual accusations. I do not exclude that there is something more behind all this, something that we still do not understand. These subhumans who didn't give a damn about someone else's life, who felt like having some fun and decided to play with someone else's fate like a toy. Cowards who valued their own skin above all else and therefore decided to permanently shut the mouth of the poor girl who simply found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yes, maybe some of them managed to escape the punishment they deserved. Maybe we will never know the whole truth about those events. But one thing I know for sure, the story of Holly Bobos should not remain just one of many criminal cases. It should be a reminder for all of us. A reminder of how fragile human life is. About how easy it is to take it away and how nothing can be done later to correct what has been done. But most importantly, a reminder that evil and indifference exist alongside us. They are lurking very close behind familiar faces, and so we must always be on guard to protect those we love. Holly Bobo deserved to live a long and happy life, but it was taken from her, and although we could not save her, we have no right to forget her. Every day of my work investigating another case, I think about her and about how much more evil there is in the world that needs to be fought. The Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles has a sinister reputation. Over nearly a century of its existence, it has been the site of numerous tragedies and mysterious events. But even against the backdrop of this grim history, the case of Elisa Lam stands out. What happened to the 21-year-old Canadian student within the walls of the Cecil in 2013 still haunts those seeking the truth. The police investigated this case for a long time, but ultimately concluded that it was a suicide. However, there are far too many puzzling and suspicious elements in this story. It's all too easy to discern the outlines of a deliberate and brutal murder. So, what really happened to Elisa Lam? Why was her body found where it was found? And most importantly, who killed her and why, if it was indeed a murder? Today we will try to unravel this mysterious story and separate facts from speculation. Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old girl originally from China, emigrated to Vancouver, Canada in 2003 with her family, consisting of her father, mother, and sister. Thanks to the large Chinese diaspora living in this city, adaptation was quick for all family members. Soon, the Lam family rented a small Chinese restaurant and led a quiet, measured life. According to regular patrons of the establishment and neighbors, the immigrant family was welcoming and friendly. Elisa, a brown-eyed girl with dark hair, was fluent in English, although she had vision problems. She was a first-year student at the University of British Columbia, which ranks 40th among 17,000 universities worldwide. The girl was responsible and hardworking, working part-time on weekends and evenings in clothing stores, and later got a job at a bank. Elisa loved to travel, and even the lack of company did not stop her. She independently visited Washington State, Ottawa, Toronto, and Niagara Falls. She dreamed of going to Los Angeles and Hollywood in the near future. In December 2012, Elisa broke up with her boyfriend, and already in January 2013, the diligent student received a Christmas bonus. She told her sister about her desire to go to America to gain new experiences and get rid of the negative feelings associated with the breakup. The funds were there, and the parents did not object. The solo journey began in San Diego, where Elisa arrived on January 22nd, and on the 26th, the girl arrived in Los Angeles and settled in the Cecil Hotel. It is worth pausing at this point and telling the story of the hotel chosen by Elisa. The Cecil was built in the 1920s. It was a 15-story building designed for wealthy people and businessmen. However, the owners later changed their policy, renting out rooms for long periods at low prices. The hotel's reputation rapidly declined. From a pretentious, fashionable establishment, the Cecil turned into a cheap hotel that barely reached 3 stars. The hotel has repeatedly become the final refuge for suicides. In 1954, Helen Gurney, exhausted from fighting a serious illness, threw herself out of a 7th-floor window. In 1962, Julia Moore also jumped from an 8th-floor window due to pregnancy by a man who refused to acknowledge the child and a difficult financial situation. Pauline Otten jumped from a 9th-floor window after an argument with her husband. She fell on top of Georgie Giannini, a passerby. Both died on the spot. Another dark page in the hotel's history was the murder of guest Goldie Osgood, who was found in her room in 1964, brutally beaten and raped. this crime remains unsolved. After the Elisa Lam incident, journalists began to savor all these facts, calling the Cecil a hotbed of evil and otherworldly forces. But it is worth remembering that the hotel is located next to the troubled Skid Row area. In the 40s, half of all crimes in Los Angeles were committed there. This real tumor of the City of Angels attracted serial killers who simply wanted to be closer to their victims and get lost in the lists of cold cases. As for the suicides, everything is quite prosaic here as well. People who had financial and personal problems often stayed at the hotel with an unfortunate location and low prices. All suicide cases were investigated. Over 90 years of the Cecil's existence, only one murder occurred there, which is not that much. It is hardly possible to confidently state that the hotel is run by evil forces based on one case. This is a typical example of a cheap hotel where criminals and people with mental disorders sometimes stay. Finally, let's return to Elisa Lam. She checked into the hotel on January 26th and intended to leave on February 1st. According to the employees, the girl behaved normally, did not demand anything, and spent most of her time outside the hotel. So it was not possible to establish exactly what Elisa was doing from January 26th to 29th. On the 29th, she left a text message on Tumblr. "I'm staying in a terrible hotel. By the word terrible, I mean tasteless. But it was built in 1928. It's Art Deco. So yeah, the hotel is cool. I think Baz Luhrmann should have filmed The Great Gatsby here." What Elisa did on January 30th is unknown. On the 31st, the staff saw her in the lobby. She was talking to her parents. Around noon, she visited a bookstore. On February 1st, Elisa did not call home. The girl had a particularly strong connection with her family. There was an agreement that she would call them every day, which she did with pleasure. After waiting until the evening of the first day of February, her father called Elisa himself. There was no answer. Then, around 8 in the evening, he called the reception. The duty manager reported that the stay at the hotel had expired on February 1st. Since the reservation was not extended, the staff vacated the room, and her belongings were waiting in the storage room. The manager did not know where their owner was. The Lam family immediately went to the nearest police station. An officer helped them file a report dated the 1st. On February 4th, the case from the Los Angeles Missing Persons Department almost immediately went to the Homicide and Major Crimes Division. The reason for this decision is unknown, as there was no data on the commission of crimes against Elisa Lam. Perhaps the police acted preemptively. Or maybe they found coincidences with previous crimes. In any case, the disappearance of the Canadian student was handled by detectives from the most prestigious and competent criminal investigation unit. On February 5th, they arrived at the hotel. On the same day, 2 dog handlers with dogs were called in and began to inspect the building. They even checked the technical floor. This floor could be reached by elevator, but it was impossible to exit without a special key. The roof, which was locked with an electronic lock, was also checked. The opening was recorded on the hotel security alarm panel. There was no data on unauthorized opening or lock breakage. The police decided to play it safe. Search activities involving dogs did not yield any results. Elisa's fate remained unknown. Detectives seized video recordings from the hotel's surveillance cameras, ATMs in the lobby and neighboring buildings, and street camera footage. They had to analyze 800 hours of video recordings from January 31st and February 1st. While viewing the video recordings, the police came across a stunning find. The camera captured the missing girl in the elevator a few hours before her death. Other cameras did not record Elisa Lam leaving the hotel, so she remained inside. From the data that came from Canada, it became known about Elisa's diagnosed bipolar disorder. This is a veiled name for psychosis, which is characterized by an alternation of 2 states: lethargic, depressed, and excited active. The disease had a mild form, and according to the doctor, did not pose a danger to others or to Lam herself. She took medication with her on the trip. On February 19th, the story of the missing Canadian student made an incredible zigzag. On the evening before and the morning of the 19th, several hotel guests complained about an unpleasant smell and strange color of the water. The Cecil Hotel had a personal water tower, 4 tanks with a volume of approximately 7,500 liters each, installed on the roof to maintain hydraulic pressure in case of water supply interruptions. The plumber decided to start checking the water quality with them. Inside one of the tanks, half filled with water, he found a floating body. According to him, this happened at 10 in the morning. At 12:49, a patrol officer officially reported that he saw a naked female body in the water. At approximately 1 o'clock, a whole column of firefighters and police officers began to pull the corpse out of the tank. Residents of Los Angeles watched the operation live. The television broadcast was conducted from helicopters of several TV channels. In addition, a whole flock of reporters settled on the roofs of neighboring buildings and near the entrance to the hotel. At 3:45, the body was pulled out of the tank. At 4 o'clock, the identity of the deceased was established. It turned out to be Elisa Lam. No one doubted this. On the evening of the same day, all residents of the United States learned about the incident. In the water tank, where the female body swollen from decomposition was floating, they found black men's shorts size M, a green t-shirt size L, a set of black lace underwear, a pair of black sandals, a red fleece jacket size XS with a hood and zipper, a wristwatch, and a key card for the Cecil Hotel. The absence of important items is surprising. A wallet, phone, and glasses, which were never found either in the room or near the body. The autopsy, conducted by a forensic expert, brought quite intriguing results. Of the intravital bodily injuries, 2 skin defects were identified under the knees of both legs. Abrasions 2.5 centimeters long on the right leg and about 1 centimeter on the left. It was established that Elisa had sexual intercourse shortly before her death, and drowning did not fit the case of Elisa Lam's death at all. On the inner side of the eyelids in the sclera, there were pinpoint hemorrhages, a sign of mechanical airway obstruction. The nasal passages were not blocked. This meant that after the body was removed from the water, there was no abundant discharge of foamy liquid from the lungs, and the release of foam is a significant sign of death by drowning. There was no water in the lungs, which means there was no reflex inhalation underwater. The girl got into the tank without breathing or with weakened superficial breathing. But Elisa Lam's death was announced as a result of drowning. Thus, Lam's death, which was not a drowning, was still declared a drowning. The police seized the medications that Elisa Lam took on the trip. Trace amounts of drugs were found in the liver, but the peak of action had passed long before death. They did not cause the death. On June 21st, the Los Angeles police put a bold end to their investigation, concluding that Elisa Lam committed suicide due to an exacerbation of bipolar disorder. Law enforcement agencies chose the path of least resistance, blaming the victim herself. How familiar this is. I wonder when they will start punishing law enforcement officers for negligence and unwillingness. Despite the fact that the Los Angeles police put an end to the investigation, recognizing Elisa Lam's death as a suicide due to an exacerbation of bipolar disorder, the public was not quick to agree with this. There were too many strange and incomprehensible things in this story to simply take and believe the official version. Both journalists and people who were simply not indifferent to the event saw a mystical trail in it, the dark intervention of otherworldly forces. But is everything really so mysterious? Perhaps it is worth looking for a more rational explanation. Let's agree with the police conclusion for a minute and consider this case from the point of view of suicidology. People who are prone to suicide have certain characteristic signs of behavior that an experienced specialist will notice immediately. From 70% to 90% of potential suicides in one way or another inform their loved ones, relatives, friends, about their intentions. But Elisa Lam did nothing of the sort, no alarming conversations or hints. Most women and girls who try to commit suicide do not die the first time. They either get scared at the last moment or just want to attract attention to themselves. Usually, the second or third attempt becomes fatal, although some practice this much longer. But Elisa, as far as is known, did not have any previous suicide attempts at all. The main reason for suicide is unbearable mental and physical pain that a person seeks to get rid of at all costs. But Elisa had a completely legal and effective way to deal with this: individually selected medications that she took under the supervision of a doctor. Why would she kill herself if the suffering could be overcome with medication? By the way, about the doctor. Elisa was being treated by the well-known psychiatrist Sarah Scarf, who had an impeccable reputation and many years of experience. There were never any complaints about her work, which means the diagnosis and therapy were correct. And if Elisa really had suicidal tendencies, Sarah Scarf would certainly have noticed it. After all, suicides, even unconsciously, give a lot of signals that an experienced specialist recognizes unmistakably. But the doctor was so confident in the stable condition of her patient that she calmly let her go on an independent trip abroad. She hardly would have done this if she had the slightest doubts. Yes, Elisa took the medications prescribed to her. So what? This is not at all an indicator of abnormality, rather the opposite. A person who follows the doctor's recommendations and regularly takes medication is usually quite adequate, able to control emotions and cope with stress. Moreover, with bipolar disorder, there are never hallucinations or delusions. Toxicological examination showed that on the eve of her death, Elisa did not drink alcohol or use drugs, and this could have exacerbated the manifestations of the disease. Another argument against suicide is the complete nudity of the body. Women who commit suicide never undress, because even in the last minutes of their lives, the thought that someone will lustfully examine their bodies is unbearable for them. But according to the official version, it turns out that Elisa undressed completely, threw all her clothes into a tank of water, and jumped in there herself. Isn't that strange? Moreover, death by drowning is terrible and painful. If the girl really wanted to end her life, she would have chosen something faster and simpler. Well, at least a jump from the roof. Fortunately, she was there. By the way, guests of this hotel who committed suicide usually jumped from windows, not drowned. Perhaps the key to this strange story lies in the video that captured Elisa Lam's last minutes of life. The police released this recording on February 13th, but there is one nuance here. In fact, the camera took these shots not on January 31st between 2 and 3 o'clock, as officially stated, but in the first half of February 1st. This was done so that investigators could check the testimony of eyewitnesses about the girl's last day of life. That is, the recording that got on the internet is not the original. So, the recording that got on the internet and caused such a stir is not actually the original. Before making the video public, forensic experts worked on it a lot. Some fragments were slowed down, some were accelerated, the date and time were hidden, and individual moments were cut out. Perhaps this was done because someone who was next to Elisa in her last hours got into the frame, and the investigation decided to hide this information. But even from this castrated video, certain conclusions can be drawn. Let's start with the fact that the girl enters the elevator on the 14th, the highest of the residential floors. She leans towards the buttons, presses them along with the door hold button. She is wearing the same clothes that will later be found at the bottom of the water tank. There are no glasses or, it seems, contact lenses on her. Elisa has to lean over to see the numbers on the buttons. The girl's movements are unhurried. She calmly stands in the corner of the cab. Analysis of her nonverbal behavior proves that Elisa is in a relaxed state, not feeling fear or anxiety. This is evidenced by the position of her arms and legs. It seems that she is waiting for someone, but some time passes, and no one enters the elevator. Then, Elisa approaches the exit, quickly looks out into the corridor, presses herself against the wall, almost in the same place where she was standing before. And a second later, she abruptly steps towards the elevator control panel, presses her back against the wall, as if she wants to be in the zone of invisibility. This maneuver looks more playful than anxious.
Body language reveals embarrassment, but not fear at all. However, no one looked into the elevator, so after a short wait, Elisa slowly looks out into the corridor again, watching the part of it to the right of the elevator. The girl glances to the left, probably assuming that the one she was waiting for had already passed while she was hiding in the corner. Then, she jumps out of the elevator on both legs. Experts regarded these actions as foolishness, a game. Elisa clearly did not feel danger and was not really hiding. Further, remaining in the corridor, the girl moves to the left edge of the doors and disappears from the camera's view for a moment. Then, in the frames, you can see the edge of her skirt and part of her shoulder. Elisa slowly raises her arms above her head. Most likely, she is fixing her hair. Analysts see these actions as an expression of sexual interest. Having dealt with her hair, she returns to the elevator. Her arms are widely spread. Lam is trying to calm down. She is in a state of strong emotional excitement. Many experts note that at this moment, Elisa, strange as it may seem, is laughing. The violent reaction is caused by the fact that someone made her laugh. Again, leaning towards the panel, Elisa begins to press the buttons with both hands. At the end, she presses the door hold again, makes a 1-second pause, and another series of pressing and holding. Having finished with the buttons, the girl exits the elevator, slowly fixing her hair. Opposite the exit is a mirror, and preening in front of it does not at all fit with fear or anxiety. When exiting, Elisa puts her elbows forward. This is how she tries to appear more confident. She stands to the left of the doorway, and although the resolution of the recording is low, experts discerned Lam is smiling. Perhaps not quite sincerely. Further, the analysis of nonverbal behavior records. The level of insincerity increases along with the level of anxiety. One of the markers is Elisa touching her shoulder with her fingertips. It is clearly visible how she leans over, as if talking to someone standing to the right of the elevator doors. At the same time, the girl actively gesticulates. Experts note excessive playfulness, a playful mood. There are no signs of fear. The eerie moment seems unnatural, only because it is here that the recording was slowed down. Let's not forget that it was worked on a lot. Elisa rises several times on the toes of her right foot. This indicates a remarkable optimism, maybe even joy. And again, sexual interest is noted. It all ends with the girl leaving the camera's field of view in the direction opposite to where her interlocutor was standing. The recording continues, and we see the elevator doors close and open twice. It is difficult to imagine that one can experience such emotions and perform such actions alone. As you know, mentally ill people, being in the grip of hallucinations, demonstrate specific motor skills. But nothing of the sort was observed in Elisa's behavior. Most likely, shortly before the described events, she met someone, perhaps even had a romantic relationship. On the video, the girl is playing hide-and-seek with her invisible companion. And although sometimes she shows some embarrassment, most likely, this is due to the fact that the acquaintance was short-lived, so Elisa felt a certain constraint and shyness. But definitely not fear. Almost throughout the entire recording, an element of play, flirting, sexual attraction is clearly visible in the girl's behavior, and only the realization that we are seeing her last minutes of life gives the video an eerie tinge. But in itself, this footage does not contain anything frightening. So, the conclusion suggests itself. There was someone else next to Elisa, someone who knew about the surveillance camera in the elevator and carefully avoided its gaze. Someone who knew that, by some strange coincidence, the video surveillance in the corridor of the 14th floor, which usually worked constantly, was turned off this time. So this someone could freely communicate with Elisa without fear of being noticed. What happened next? Let's turn to the plan of the 14th floor. On it we see A. Smokeless fire escapes, B. Internal fire escapes, one of which leads to the technical floor and the other to the roof. The doors to the internal stairs are locked with an electronic lock. It is impossible to open them unnoticed by the security. At that time,
no attempts to pass through these doors were recorded. There remain the smokeless stairs mounted on the outer walls of the hotel. They can be used to reach the roof without much effort. This has been repeatedly proven by bloggers and journalists who penetrated there in this way.
There were no obstacles to this. Only desire and a little courage were needed. If you perceive this as a romantic adventure, especially in the company of a person to whom you feel sympathy, then it can even be fun. It is quite possible that such a proposal caused Elisa the joy that can be noticed in several moments of the video recording. Most likely, the girl met her future killer even before February 1st, and it is just as likely that she voluntarily agreed to intimate closeness with him, as well as to climb to the roof together. Maybe she even undressed of her own free will. Until some fatal moment, Elisa's relationship with her killer was playful and quite friendly. And then some incident provoked an acute conflict. Murderers often commit crimes under the influence of aggression that arises in response to actions or words that are unacceptable to them. For serial killers, this is doubly true. They attack not every potential victim, but only the one whose behavior seems offensive to them. It seems that Elisa's killer did not torture or mock her. Most likely, he used a chokehold with his forearm, a technique from which even an adult man loses consciousness in just 15 seconds. This method has two important features. Firstly, it does not leave visible traces, and secondly, it leads to rapid loss of consciousness without the ability to resist. Having strangled Elisa, the criminal raised her unconscious body to the tank roof, using a ladder that was always stored there. This explains the absence of the girl's fingerprints on the stairs, and then, through the hatch, he lowered her into the water. Recall, Elisa was strangled, as indicated by pinpoint hemorrhages on the inner side of the eyelids and sclera found during the autopsy. At the same time, her mouth was not forcibly closed. Otherwise, there would have been injuries from the teeth on the inner side of the lips. No significant amount of water got into the lungs, which means there was no deep reflex inhalation underwater. Elisa ended up in the tank, either completely without breathing or with weakened superficial breathing. After that, the killer searched her clothes, taking the money, phone, and glasses. He had to get rid of the phone. It could have contained their correspondence and photos. He probably spent the money and kept the glasses as a trophy. Having searched the clothes, the criminal threw it into the same tank. He did not try to imitate suicide. He just hid the body. The person who killed Elisa Lam is cold-blooded, prudent, and has experience in such matters. Perhaps she had already committed similar crimes before. The killer perfectly understood what the police would pay attention to and how he should act in order to remain unnoticed. It is possible that he knew. Water will destroy biological traces. If you look at the circumstances of Elisa Lam's death without bias, it becomes obvious that this is not at all like suicide. Did the Los Angeles police investigators not understand this? No, they were perfectly aware of everything. It's just that the reason they decided not to open a criminal case was extremely pragmatic. After all, if there is a bullet, there must be a gun. If there is a stab wound, there must be a knife somewhere. This is how murders usually happen. But when there is something incomprehensible, vague, something that is difficult to prove, it is better to close the case at the stage of inquiry. Why waste effort and time on searches that may turn out to be in vain? Even if this murder was committed by a maniac, it is worth waiting for the next episode in order to understand the criminal's model of action. By the way, a similar crime occurred just a month later. In Los Angeles, even without Elisa Lam, there are enough murdered women. Police resources should not be spent on an investigation that is minimally likely to end in a court verdict. Statistics require an increase in crime detection rates. Elisa Lam's parents demanded compensation from the hotel for negligence. After all, unhindered access to the roof still exists. But negligence can be seen in this story literally in everything. Many questions remain for the investigation. Can we assert that everything happened exactly as described above? Of course not. This is just one version. Yes, there are huge databases that describe the typical behavior of murderers. They work well as an example. But can we say with certainty that the criminals who are caught are similar to those who are still at large? Perhaps the police catch those who have primitive motivation? What if they ended up behind bars precisely because of the predictability of their actions? It is quite probable that Elisa became the victim of someone whose actions cannot be explained. We can only hope that someday the truth will come out.
I just want to make it clear that I've never had intention of taking my twin sister's life. And if I could take back what I've done, I would in a heartbeat.
On January 8th, 1992, an extraordinary event took place in the city of Camden, New Jersey. Identical twin girls Amanda and Anna Ramirez were born into the world. The girls arrived just minutes apart, like two little angels entering this life hand in hand.
From their very first days, the sisters shared a special bond that only grew stronger over the years. The girls' parents, immigrants from Puerto Rico, had built a large, loving family in pursuit of a better life. Despite the hardships they faced on their journey to the American dream, they managed to keep their home warm and united. Amanda and Anna grew up surrounded by older siblings, with younger sisters arriving later. Yet the twins stood out from the rest with their uncanny resemblance and inseparable bond. From a very young age, the sisters were like two peas in a pod. They adored dressing alike, playing with identical toys, and spending every waking moment together. It seemed Amanda and Anna understood each other without words, sensing the other's moods and emotions. Even childhood squabbles were quickly forgotten as they became best friends again. I've seen photos of Amanda and Anna as children, and I must say their likeness is simply astonishing. It must have been challenging even for their parents to tell them apart at times. That closeness between sisters is unique, but it also had the potential to cause issues down the road. Watching Amanda and Anna during those years, one could only marvel at the strength of their connection. They were like two shoots of the same tree, reaching for each other, drawing strength and inspiration. Their parents and family took immense pride in their special girls and rejoiced that in this big, often harsh world, they had each other. Little did anyone know then what trials lay ahead and how their unique bond would impact the course of events. But in those carefree childhood days, everything seemed so simple and bright, with so many uncharted paths still to explore. The birth of twins is always something special, but Amanda and Anna's story is truly one of a kind. Their loving, close-knit upbringing built a strong foundation for their future lives. However, as we know, life often throws unexpected curveballs, and this case is a prime example of how even the strongest bonds can be tested by fate. From the very first days, Amanda and Anna's parents noticed their daughter's incredible bond that seemed to have formed in the womb itself. They recounted how in those early months, the sisters would even sleep in the same crib as though unable to be apart. This special connection only intensified over the years, forging Amanda and Anna into a true team. They did everything together, practically joined at the hip, unwaveringly following each other's every move. Observing them, I couldn't help but ponder just how powerful a twin bond can become and how it shapes their lives. The girl's mother, Mrs. Ramirez, warmly recalled how she nurtured the friendship between her daughters, wanting Amanda and Anna to forever remain each other's pillars, and the sisters did not disappoint. They learned to walk together, started preschool and school together, shared their most intimate secrets. It seemed nothing in this world could break their mighty sisterly union that only tempered with time. As a detective, I often encounter cases where close bonds between people become a trial for themselves and those around them. So Amanda and Anna's story piqued my interest, not just professionally, but also in understanding human nature. The parents shared that the twins had their own secret language for communicating with each other. At times, it was as if they could read each other's minds, anticipating the other's actions and desires. It was something unfathomable, like a telepathic link that existed only between the two of them. Even at school, teachers marveled at how Amanda and Anna could seamlessly complete each other's answers as one singular entity. This extraordinary sisterly bond inspired awe, but also raised concerns. Would it hinder their individual growth? Could the girls find their place in life alone, without their counterparts' constant presence? These were the questions that nagged not just the parents, but me as well as I delved into the details of this incredible story. Yet in childhood, it all seemed so idyllic. Amanda and Anna were blissfully happy together, and it appeared it would always be that way. They shared their most private dreams, supported each other's pursuits, rejoiced in successes and consoled failures. The sisters were two halves of a whole, unable to envision life without the other. Amanda and Anna grew up in an atmosphere of love, support, and unity. The large Ramirez family did everything in their power to provide the girls with a joyful, carefree childhood. The sisters played together, got into mischief together, attended family celebrations side by side. They adored dressing up in matching dresses and fooling those around them by pretending to be each other. Their parents smiled recounting those moments when even they couldn't tell their own daughters apart. It was a true test for everyone, but also a source of laughter and delight in the Ramirez household. At school, the twin sisters stuck together too. They excelled equally in nearly every subject, often doing each other's homework assignments. Yet teachers didn't scold Amanda and Anna too harshly for such antics, as the sisters demonstrated excellent grades and behavior. According to their school friends, Amanda and Anna operated as a team, always ready to help one another out. Even during tests, the sisters managed to discreetly pass notes with answers. It was something incredible, as if they could read each other's minds. The twins grew into kind-hearted, good-natured, and joyful young women. They easily connected with people and lit up any group. Amanda and Anna dreamed of becoming nurses to help the sick and ailing. And though their family lacked the funds for both daughters' education, their parents vowed to do whatever it took to make their girls' dreams come true. With tears in her eyes, Mrs. Ramirez recounted how she and her husband worked tirelessly to give Amanda and Anna the chance to attend college. It was their shared dream, and they were willing to make any sacrifice for their children's happiness. Amanda and Anna's classmates and friends always remarked on their kindness, sincerity, and willingness to lend a hand. The girls were the true jewels of school life, ever smiling, welcoming, and open to connection. They enthusiastically participated in all kinds of events, from charity fairs to school plays. It seemed nothing could cast a shadow over their happy childhood and carefree adolescence. Yet life brings not just joys and triumphs, but obstacles too that must be overcome. For Amanda and Anna, the trial came in the form of their father's illness. Mr. Ramirez fell gravely sick, leaving the family in dire straits. But even in those dark times, the sisters never lost hope, supporting each other every step. They banded together even tighter, striving to help their mother and ease their father's suffering. This period became a true test of their spiritual fortitude and sisterly bonds' resilience. But that carefree childhood passed quickly, and the sisters had to grow up. Anna was the first to marry her beloved Louis and give birth to 3 wonderful children. She became a doting mother who spared no effort for her little ones. At the same time, Anna completed nursing courses and began working as a licensed nurse. Patients and colleagues adored Anna for her kindness, warmth, and willingness to help at a moment's notice. As her co-workers recounted, Anna was a true angel in the hospital, always smiling, compassionate, and tireless. She had a knack for lifting every patient's spirits, finding the right words of solace and support. Anna worked hard to secure a bright future for her kids. Yet despite her busyness, she always made time for her large family, especially her beloved sister Amanda. Anna often visited her parents, sisters, and brothers. Chatting with Amanda nearly every day, the girls would talk for hours on the phone, sharing experiences and supporting each other. Even distance and life's troubles couldn't weaken their special bond. It seemed to only grow stronger over the years, helping the sisters overcome any hardship. Unlike her sister, Amanda was in no rush to marry. She too completed nursing courses and began working at the same hospital as Anna. The girls were together again like in childhood, now saving lives side by side. Colleagues joked that with nurses like the Ramirez sisters, any patient would recover in no time, as they were a true guardian angel team. Like Anna, Amanda was always ready to lend a hand, uplift with a kind word and sincere smile. Patients adored her warmth and compassion, while colleagues respected her professionalism and dedication. In her free time, Amanda often visited her sister to play with her nieces and nephews and catch up with Anna. The sisters could spend hours in the kitchen over cups of coffee, reminiscing about childhood and discussing their girlhood dreams. They laughed until they cried, recounting hilarious tales from the past, and cried sharing each other's pains and disappointments. These moments of sisterly closeness were the most precious for them, for it was in those instances that they truly felt happy and needed by one another. Amanda too dreamed of getting married and having children, so she actively helped Anna care for her babies, gaining first-hand experience in motherhood. The first years of Anna's eldest daughter's life unfolded under the watchful eyes of her loving mother and doting Aunt Amanda. This allowed the sisters to bond even tighter and preserve their special connection. And for Amanda, caring for her niece became an invaluable school for future parenthood. She joyfully played with, fed, bathed, and doted on the little one. Anna joked that with such a great helper, she could have 10 kids, and Anna herself was in dire need of her twins' assistance juggling 3 young children plus work. The young mother could barely keep up with all her duties. Amanda tried to be there, offering her shoulder in the toughest moments. She visited her sister every weekend, helped with cleaning, cooked delicious meals so Anna could get some rest. The sisters strolled through parks with the kids, went shopping, discussed their girly secrets. These were moments of true happiness and unity when it seemed the whole world revolved around their small yet mighty family. Eventually, Amanda got a boyfriend and unexpectedly became pregnant. It was a real surprise for both sisters, but they knew they'd tackle any challenge together. Now it was Anna's turn to fully support her sister, sharing wisdom and advice. The girls jointly prepared for the arrival of their parents' first grandchild and Amanda's firstborn. They spent hours picking out baby items, setting up the nursery, dreaming of what he would be like. Amanda's pregnancy was not an easy one, with severe morning sickness and swelling. But Anna was always by her side, ready to help and encourage her sister. She drove Amanda to all her medical checkups, monitored her well-being, ensured she ate properly and didn't overexert herself. Anna understood how crucial it was for Amanda to feel protected and needed during this difficult time. And then that long-awaited day finally arrived. Little Alex, Amanda's firstborn and Anna's nephew, entered the world. The sisters couldn't get enough of the tiny bundle who resembled them both so much. Together they cared for, bathed, and lulled the baby to sleep. Alex became yet another proof of their inseparable bond, one more thread tying their fates tightly together. Motherhood transformed Amanda, making her more responsible and wise. Now she understood her sister's anxieties and joys even better. The girls could spend hours discussing childhood antics, exchanging parenting tips, dreaming of their kids' futures. They knew their children would grow up just as close and loving as they were. Over the years, the children grew while Amanda and Anna's sisterly bond only strengthened further. They continued to be each other's pillars, sharing every joy and sorrow. Their kids too grew up together like siblings, inheriting their mother's love and devotion to family. Despite the demands of motherhood, the sisters still found time to cut loose. Amanda and Anna loved partying and living it up with friends. They often hit the clubs together, dancing until dawn. Among their crew, the twins radiated wild energy, positivity, and some magical aura of unity. The Ramirez sisters seemed to read each other's minds, understanding every half-uttered word, laughing at inside jokes only they shared. On June 22, 2019, Amanda and Anna went out partying again. At that point, they were 27, with Anna raising 3 young kids, while Amanda had recently given birth to her first daughter and was battling postpartum depression. But despite the exhaustion and responsibilities, the sisters decided to let loose and dance like old times. The girls first had fun at a club with friends. Around midnight, the group headed to their cousin's place. There, the sisters continued drinking, laughing, and snapping carefree selfies. In one photo posted to social media around 5 a.m., the beaming twins posed with drinks in hand, the caption reading they were feeling those positive vibrations. Little did anyone know then that this picture would become the sisters' final living image. As the detective who investigated this case, I understand how precious every moment spent with loved ones truly is. That photo became a symbol of just how fragile human life can be and how crucial it is to savor every instant while we can. In that snapshot, Amanda and Anna looked carefree and joyful, blissfully unaware of the tragedy looming just ahead. Around 5:30 a.m., tragedy struck. It was at that moment that Anna suffered a deep stab wound to her chest and collapsed, bleeding onto the sidewalk outside her cousin's home. The police received a frantic 911 call around 5:40 a.m. from Amanda. The terrified woman pleaded for help, screaming that her sister was injured and bleeding profusely. Before medics and cops arrived, Anna was still breathing but soon lost consciousness from the trauma and blood loss. An ambulance rushed the victim to the nearest medical center. Doctors fought for nearly an hour to save Anna's life, but at 6:20 a.m. they pronounced her dead. The severe stab wound proved fatal. The mother of 3 had perished in the arms of medical staff. This tragic event came as a true shock to the Ramirez family and all who knew Anna. The horrific news of her death spread like wildfire through the small town, leaving a trail of unanswered questions in its wake. No one could believe that this joyful, loving woman had left this world so young under such mysterious circumstances. For Amanda, losing her sister was the hardest blow of all. In an instant, she lost her closest kin whom she'd walked through life side by side with. The pain of this loss was unbearable, the realization that Anna was gone for good seeming like a waking nightmare to escape from. But the harsh reality was that Anna had truly passed, forever changing the lives of her loved ones. Now the Ramirez family would have to find a way to keep living without her, raise her children, remember her with love and sorrow.
and Amanda would have to grow accustomed to never being able to hug her sister, seek her advice, or simply sit in silent sisterly company again. Anna's death left a whirlwind of questions unanswered. What had happened that fateful night? Who could have wished harm upon this kind-hearted woman? Was it an accident or intentional crime? The answers still needed to be found, and that became the primary mission for the police and detectives investigating the case. But whatever the official findings, for Anna's loved ones, she would forever remain a loving daughter, sister, mother, and friend. Her bright spirit would live on in their hearts, her memory providing warmth in the darkest hours. The shocking news of Anna's death left the entire Ramirez family stunned. No one could believe that some madman had inflicted a fatal wound upon the young mother in the middle of the street. After all, Anna was a kind, compassionate girl with no enemies or ill wishes, no run-ins with the law. So who could have dealt with a nurse so brutally? A blind coincidence or someone from her inner circle? Amanda's behavior immediately raised many questions for the police. Her clothing was covered in stains of her dead sister's blood, while her hands bore fresh cuts characteristic of a struggle over a knife. Moreover, neighbors claimed to have heard a loud argument between the sisters, but no male voices. These details compelled investigators to pay special attention to Amanda and her possible involvement in the tragedy. At first, Amanda refused to let the officers into her cousin's apartment, insisting she had just accidentally cut herself. But the bloody footprints on the floor and blood-stained kitchen knife in the sink made detectives suspect a complex case of family violence. The woman was taken in for questioning, where she would have to explain her behavior and recount everything that happened that fateful night. During interrogation, Amanda acted strangely and ambiguously. She oscillated between crying and pleading for belief in her innocence, then abruptly shutting down and refusing to answer questions. She claimed not to remember many details due to alcohol intoxication, that she and her sister had argued over something trivial, followed by a blackout. Such testimony only strengthened investigators' suspicions about Amanda's role in the murder. Other party guests confirmed the sisters had indeed quarreled before Anna stormed out alone. But no one could say precisely what happened next and how she sustained her fatal injury. Forensics showed the knife used to kill the woman belonged to the owners of the apartment where the party took place. However, no fingerprints were found, and the sister's cousin swore he wasn't involved in the crime. This tangled case became a true challenge for detectives. On one hand, all evidence pointed to Anna's killer being someone in her inner circle, possibly even her own sister. But on the other, the motive for such a brutal crime remained unclear. After all, the Ramirez sisters had always been renowned for their inseparability and genuine love for each other. Who and why would want to shatter that special bond? As the investigation dragged on, the Ramirez family tried to recover from the horrific tragedy. They couldn't fathom Amanda intentionally harming her own flesh and blood, offering her unconditional support. But lingering doubts and unanswered questions tormented them. Why was Amanda acting so strangely? What really transpired that night? And would they ever uncover the truth about Anna's death? These questions haunted Anna's loved ones and friends. They understood the answers could prove too painful and shocking. Yet they also knew without the truth they couldn't truly move forward, couldn't properly bid Anna farewell and find solace. Initially, Amanda tried convincing the police she had simply found her already injured sister on the sidewalk. She claimed to have approached Anna, attempted to stop the bleeding, and gotten covered in blood herself in the process. Then, scared, she ran to the apartment to await the ambulance. But this version poorly aligned with the defensive cuts on Amanda's hands that immediately raised investigators' suspicions she was hiding something. They began scrutinizing her testimony more thoroughly. The woman quickly realized she wasn't being believed and changed her story. Now she insisted that she and Anna had been drinking at their cousin's place when they abruptly got into an argument, even resulting in Anna slapping her. Afterwards, Anna left the home while Amanda stayed behind with their cousin. 45 minutes later, she went outside and discovered her sister's bloodied body. This account seemed more plausible, yet still left many questions unanswered. Investigators tried determining what exactly the sisters had quarreled over and whether it could have motivated a murder. But Amanda kept altering her statements, getting muddled in the details, unable to clearly explain what happened. At times she claimed not remembering the conflict's cause, then suddenly recalling minor insults that supposedly escalated into a physical fight. Such inconsistent, contradictory testimony only deepened detectives' suspicions about Amanda's involvement in the crime. They suspected she was concealing something, perhaps trying to cover for herself or someone else, but proving it was no easy feat with no direct evidence against Amanda, while her statements continually changed. Interviewing other witnesses didn't clarify matters either. The sister's cousin corroborated they had fought but insisted hearing and seeing nothing suspicious. Neighbors reported loud shouts and scuffling noises, but none could pinpoint precisely who exited the building and when. Investigators found themselves at a dead end. All signs pointed to a crime of passion, yet the motive and circumstances remained baffling, and Amanda's convoluted statements only further muddied the waters. Meanwhile, the Ramirez family grieved their terrible tragedy. They couldn't fathom Anna being gone, desperately searching for answers. Parents and relatives tried supporting Amanda, believing her innocence, yet tortured by lingering doubts. Why was she acting so strangely? What really happened that night? And would they ever uncover the truth? For Amanda, the situation became a true ordeal. She had to live daily with the burden of guilt and suspicion, respond to uncomfortable questions from detectives and kin, reliving that horrific moment she claimed to have discovered her sister's body again and again. And though the woman maintained her non-involvement, her own memories and feelings grew increasingly tangled, tormenting her every waking moment. Would Amanda be able to prove her innocence? Could the investigation unravel this complex knot of contradictory testimonies and find the real killer? And what price would the Ramirez family have to pay for the truth about Anna's death? Amanda claimed not to remember the reasons for arguing with her sister. She had drunk too much that night. She then recounted how, after being slapped, something seemed to short-circuit in her head. She blacked out, only coming to while standing over bloodied Anna with a knife in hand. Terrified, she tossed the knife in the sink and called an ambulance. The woman wept bitterly, begging to be believed that she hadn't wanted her little sister dead. Her testimony rang sincere yet raised many questions and doubts for investigators. Detectives concluded Amanda was holding something back. It was doubtful a simple quarrel after 27 years of an ideal sisterly bond could escalate into such a bloody attack. Those mysterious lapses in memory also raised major skepticism. Police suspected Amanda had long harbored resentment towards her sister that came bursting out in a drunken rage with a knife. They began carefully examining the sister's past, searching for possible triggers for conflict. The fact that the woman had struck Anna with one precise blow to the heart indicated premeditated intent to kill, and her attempt to shift blame onto some abstract assailant only worsened the situation. The family denied any serious conflicts between the sisters. Their cousin corroborated the fight, but admitted not knowing what had provoked the argument between the twins. Without this key information, investigators knew unraveling the truth would prove difficult. The defensive cuts on Amanda's hands seemed to confirm her account of struggling over the knife. But if events unfolded as she claimed, why brandish a deadly weapon during a tiff with her sister in the first place? And why not immediately call an ambulance instead of returning to the apartment? These lingering questions tormented detectives striving to reconstruct the night's fateful events. Amanda couldn't answer those questions. She insisted remembering precious little from that evening, too intoxicated and ravaged by postpartum depression. But despite her tears and pleas for belief, police remained convinced something horrific had transpired between the sisters that morning Amanda wasn't divulging. Whatever it was had culminated in one sister's death with a knife in the other's grip. And now investigators had to determine whether it was tragic accident or premeditated murder. As the probe dragged on, the Ramirez family struggled to find solace and understand what had befallen their girls. They couldn't fathom Amanda intentionally harming the sister she'd been inseparable from her whole life. Yet gnawing doubts and speculations tormented them. Was Amanda concealing some terrible secret? Had that secret ignited the fatal fight? And would they ever know the truth? Meanwhile, Amanda herself, broken by grief and despair, strove to prove her innocence. She replayed that night's events in her mind over and over, but memories remained jumbled and fragmented. The woman couldn't comprehend how she could have caused her beloved sister's death, even accidentally, and the blackouts only compounded her confusion and fear. Could she truly be repressing something unaware herself? Police continued gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses, hoping to find the key to unraveling this chilling tale. They understood any detail could prove pivotal, any testimony could shed light on that fateful night. Yet the more they uncovered, the more tangled the case became, and the harder it was to believe Amanda could have intentionally taken her twin sister's life. This tragedy became an ordeal not just for the Ramirez family, but for all who knew Amanda and Anna. People struggled to comprehend how such a loving, close-knit clan could find themselves at the epicenter of such a horrific story, and the suspicions and rumors only salted the already raw wounds. The media pounced on the news, further complicating detectives' work. As a practicing detective myself, I understand the immense pressure public scrutiny exerts, making it even harder to focus on the job at hand. The investigation had reached a dead end when suddenly an anonymous call came through to the police hotline. The unknown caller claimed Anna had been murdered by her own sister out of jealousy. This version was later corroborated by the victim's aunt, who alleged Amanda had been secretly carrying on an affair with Anna's husband, exploiting her uncanny resemblance to her twin. When Anna uncovered this liaison, she apparently accused her sister of treacherous betrayal in a heated rage. This bombshell information became a true sensation, compelling detectives to view the case from a new angle. The aunt insisted she had overheard Amanda boasting to a friend about her adulterous tryst with Anna's husband, mockingly adding how her dimwit sister remained oblivious. This theory could explain Amanda's strange behavior, adamantly denying the fight's trigger. If the woman had indeed seduced her brother-in-law, she likely wouldn't want to admit to such a shameful act. Investigators began scrutinizing interpersonal dynamics within the Ramirez family more closely, seeking confirmation of this scandalous hypothesis. However, all other relatives, friends, and especially Anna's husband unanimously dismissed rumors of a love triangle. They maintained the twins loved each other above all else, while Anna adored her Louis and would never have betrayed him. Suspicions of infidelity struck the kin as absurd and outrageous, completely inconsistent with the deceased's bride image. They couldn't fathom Amanda so treacherously deceiving her lifelong inseparable sister. Amanda and Anna's 19-year-old younger sister Monica swore under oath that the twins simply couldn't have betrayed one another that way, bound by a profound spiritual connection. The girl testified that Anna had been dating Louis for years, while Amanda had her own longtime boyfriend whom she had a daughter with and planned to marry. So there was no incentive for an affair with her brother-in-law, Monica insisted. Her testimony cast doubt on the love triangle theory, compelling a search for alternative motives. When police notified Amanda of her sister's death, she allegedly flew into hysterics. According to Monica, who was on the phone with Amanda in that moment, her sister wept so inconsolably and begged for belief that her tears clearly stemmed from genuine anguish rather than a treacherous deceiver's feigned remorse. The family continued maintaining the police investigation files amounted to unfounded speculation and slander. They couldn't accept Amanda being capable of such a horrific crime. Investigators found themselves in a difficult position. On one hand, the jealousy-fueled love triangle seemed plausible, potentially explaining Amanda's bizarre conduct. But on the other, testimony from the sisters' loved ones directly contradicted this narrative. Plus, no hard evidence of an affair could be uncovered. An anonymous call and the aunt's hearsay provided far too flimsy a basis for premeditated murder charges. In my opinion, this love triangle is pure nonsense, pardon my bluntness. But if you have your own theory, feel free to share it with me in the comments. I'd be happy to discuss it further. Meanwhile, Amanda's defense insisted on her innocence. Her attorneys argued all evidence against their client amounted to circumstantial contradictions. They urged the court not to fall for provocations and conjecture, but rely solely on facts and common sense. The defenders stressed that Amanda and Anna were not just sisters, but best friends who would never betray each other. The case garnered increasing publicity, drawing intense public and media scrutiny. Public opinion diverged. Some believed in Amanda's innocence and sympathized with the Ramirez family's plight, while others remained convinced of her guilt, demanding harsh punishment. This trial became a true ordeal for all participants, especially Amanda, fighting not just for her freedom, but to preserve her sister's honor and good name. In September 2019, Amanda entered into a plea deal with prosecutors. She admitted that under the influence of alcohol and postpartum depression, she had unconsciously, in a state of passion, stabbed her sister with a knife. The woman insisted she harbored no malicious intent and bitterly regretted her actions, having essentially ruined 2 lives, her own and her beloved sister's. Her confession came as a shock to all who had followed this high-profile case. During the trial, Amanda wept bitterly, begging God and everyone present for forgiveness, calling herself the vilest creature while pleading for a chance to return. She stated she would now carry the cross of remorse and the pain of irreparable loss until the end of her days. The court's sentence paled in comparison to the eternal pains of conscience she claimed. Her words moved those in the courtroom, yet could not bring the deceased Anna back. The judge ruled Anna's killing an intentional crime, but took into account Amanda's sincere remorse and extenuating circumstances. She was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment with possibility of parole after serving 5 years. Amanda broke down sobbing upon hearing the sentence, imploring the heavens and all around to forgive her most grievous sin. She understood this punishment amounted to only a fraction of the guilt she would bear for life. After the trial, the victims' relatives stated they harbored no ill will towards Amanda and accepted her remorse.
Amanda and Anna's mother took custody of her grandchildren, while the rest of the family vowed to support the imprisoned woman's young daughter until her release. The Kim believed Amanda had sincerely repented and deserved a chance at atonement. They held faith that in time they could forgive her and restore family ties for the children's sake and Anna's memory. Such a chilling story, colleagues. As difficult as it is to admit, it was drinking and unbridled emotion that ruined the lives of 2 young women, 2 families, depriving 5 children of a mother's love. And the core mystery, what truly sparked that fatal burst of rage, continues to be debated by police, attorneys, journalists to this day. The official investigation failed to provide a definitive answer. Amanda's loved ones view her an innocent victim of tragic circumstance, while law enforcement leans towards a theory of premeditated murder driven by jealousy. Proving or disproving a clandestine liaison between Amanda and her brother-in-law is now impossible. The woman adamantly denies any such subtext to the fight, while Anna's husband categorically rejects even hypothetical possibility of such events transpiring. This secret, it seems, will be forever buried alongside Ada. Yet despite all the speculation and uncomfortable questions, one sad fact alone remains certain: a young mother of 2 infants ended her 27-year-old twin sister's life with a single knife blow and now bitterly regrets her actions. And the bereaved Ramirez family will take a long time recovering from the consequences of that dreadful night of June 22, 2019. They will have to learn to live with this pain and Anna's memory, raise her children, and build a new life without her. This tragedy serves as a grave lesson for us all. A lesson in how fragile and vulnerable human life truly is, how easily it can be shattered in one fateful instant, and that neither family bonds nor love can shield us from horrific mistakes and irreversible loss. Amanda must now carry the burden of guilt and remorse for her crime for the rest of her days. While we outside observers can only sympathize with her shattered fate and pray such tragedies never repeat themselves. The story of Amanda and Anna Ramirez is more than just a criminal chronicle. It's a true human drama. A drama about 2 ruined lives, about love twisted into hatred, and about the remorse that may perhaps lead to atonement. And although justice has been served and the guilty punished, this story will continue aching in the hearts of all who know it for a long time to come. For there is no greater pain than losing a loved one, especially when that loss results from a fatal mistake by someone close.
A young Italian woman, Veronica, faced numerous challenges in her life. At the age of 16, she met Davide Stival at a bar, who immediately caught her eye, and she quickly opened up to him. Despite the 4-year age difference, the couple conversed as if they had known each other for a long time. Despite the girl's youth, they started a relationship. Within 3 months, Veronica was already begging to start a family. The girl had no doubts. She wanted a child from David. He agreed and they moved in together. Soon, Veronica became pregnant. In 2006, when she was only 17 and he was 21, their son Loris was born. It was then that Veronica's family began to experience problems. Constant conflicts with her parents and the desire to run away from home, intensified with the birth of the out-of-wedlock child. However, the young girl created a semblance of a family, contrary to the expectations of her elders. To the surprise of their relatives, the young couple's affairs were going quite well. Terrible trials lay ahead. But for now, Veronica tried to give her son everything he needed. Over time, the couple officially legalized their marriage. The young mother became pregnant again and gave birth to a second boy, whom they named Diego. Veronica essentially remained under the care of her parents. Although Davide worked, his efforts were not enough to provide for his wife and 2 children. The parents from both sides supported the couple in every possible way, primarily financially. Veronica, on the other hand, did not even think about looking for a job, having completely devoted herself to the children and the household. Her husband considered her an exemplary, industrious, neat, and loving wife. The children grew up, having genuinely warm relationships with their mother. She spent all her free time with them, although sometimes it resembled more of a friendship between peers. Probably because of the too early age of motherhood, there is an opinion that Veronica was still in a rebellious mood, which is why conflicts with her parents escalated. The elders believed that she would not become a full-fledged mother if she perceived everything as a game. But any attempts to get through to her ended in hysterics. The couple lived in a rural area with a population of 10,000 inhabitants.
the town of Santa Croce Camarina in southern Italian Sicily, where everyone knew each other. For such a cozy corner, such early motherhood seemed strange. However, no one suspected that this reckless, youthful haste would lead to the terrible tragedy that we will tell you about. On November 29, 2014, at noon, Veronica Panarello appeared at the police station. The 25-year-old woman reported the disappearance of her 8-year-old son, Loris. According to her, in the morning, as always, she had brought the boy to school. He went inside with the other students. Then she took her younger son to kindergarten. Loris was supposed to be at school until 12:30. When the woman came to pick him up, her son was nowhere to be found. The mother became alarmed and could not find him. Immediately after that, Veronica decided to go to the police and write a statement about the disappearance of the 8-year-old boy. Law enforcement officers immediately contacted the school, but no teacher or employee had seen Loris that day. The students also confirmed that they had not met him either near the school or in class. Some thought that the boy was skipping classes. Others assumed that he could have been kidnapped. However, no one believed that Loris would voluntarily get into an unfamiliar car. He was too smart for that. So the question arose, how could he have ended up on the street if his mother had taken him to the school door and saw him go inside? At that time, her 29-year-old husband, Davide Stival, was working as a driver and was on a trip in Rome. The Carabinieri immediately called him, and the man was shocked by the news. It turned out that his wife had not even informed him. Then he called Veronica himself, and she confirmed Loris's disappearance. David immediately got on a plane to get to the city as quickly as possible. As soon as he landed, he saw a post on his wife's social media with a photo of her and their son. It was an announcement that the boy had been found dead. Loris's body was found 4 hours after the police report. It had been thrown into a ditch near an old mill. The place was just minutes away from the couple's house by car. It was accidentally discovered by an elderly man who was hunting in the area. During his usual walk through the forest, he noticed something suspicious in the mud. As he approached, the witness realized that it was not just a discarded object, but the body of a child. The man immediately informed the police about the discovery. At the scene, criminologists found the child's mutilated body, unnaturally twisted in the ditch, with his pants pulled down and no underwear. Law enforcement officers immediately suspected a sexual motive for the crime. Investigators believed that they were dealing with a child molester. However, unlike typical perverts, he not only raped his victims, but also killed them. This made the criminal twice as dangerous. News of the tragedy quickly spread through the town, sowing panic among the inhabitants. The realization that every child could become a target of a predator instilled fear and forced people to change their usual way of life. The news of the murder in the small village instantly flew around all of Italy. The country's central TV channels talked about the victim. This event became one of the loudest newsworthy events of 2014, stirring up the public. Society demanded that the police catch the criminal as soon as possible and bring him to justice. Meanwhile, detectives, working tirelessly, searched for the monster capable of such an act to calm the community. The investigators working on the case immediately noticed some strange details. The crime was clearly not committed according to the classic scheme characteristic of typical rapists and maniacs. The strangest thing was not even the absence of the child's underwear. After removing it, the criminal put the pants back on the body. Such abusers do indeed often collect the victim's belongings, but they almost never put the clothes back on after taking the trophy. Moreover, no similar cases had been observed in this area before. The police turned their attention to the family of the deceased. Veronica and Davide were decent people. Everyone knew them as a loving young family. Despite the fact that the child was born when the mother was a minor, now she had become an adult woman and really gave the impression of a devoted mother. In any case, under such circumstances, the most valuable information can be provided by the family itself. So the investigators came to talk to the parents of the murdered boy. Here, the police found out that Davide spent very little time at home. Due to his work as a driver,
He was with his family for no more than 50 days a month. Almost all the free time, the children were with their mother. Thus, the young woman was constantly left alone, without a husband. It was not easy for her to cope with household chores and raising children on her own. The woman often complained about the difficulties. Against the background of her loneliness, rumors about lovers spread through the town. However, during the check, it was not possible to confirm this information. At the Stevil family's house, the police found Veronica. According to Davide, this tragedy had destroyed her. The young mother was constantly crying and refusing to eat. Subsequently, this led to exhaustion. The young woman was taken to the hospital, where she had to be given special IV drips with a nutritious solution so that she would not die. The police saw her during this period. She really looked bad. Veronica was emotionally broken. It even manifested physically. Huge dark circles formed under her eyes and her skin took on an unhealthy pallor. During this period, Loris's younger brother Diego was still living with the family. However, later, the parents took him to his grandparents, as the mother was in an unstable mental state. She did not take care not only of herself, but also ignored the needs of the child. The husband supported his wife all this time and was forced to quit his job. Despite the difficulty with which the Stevil family was experiencing the loss of a child, the investigators decided to bring both parents to the place where Loris's body was found. The police made video recordings. They believed that this trip could provide useful data. In the video, you can see not even Veronica, but literally the shadow of a person. So hard was she experiencing the loss of her son. Horatio Fedone got on the list of suspects. He was the same elderly hunter who discovered the child's body. The detectives suspected him because the man had led them to the victim, just 4 hours after the boy was declared missing. Of course, it could have been a coincidence, but it was worth making sure how the man managed to find the deceased so quickly. The investigators launched a large-scale check but could not find a connection between the hunter and the evidence. He successfully passed a polygraph test, had a confirmed alibi for the morning of Loris's disappearance, and his fingerprints and DNA were not found on the boy's body. However, the heightened interest in Horatio Fedone led to local residents starting to accuse Veronica of having an intimate relationship with his grandson, and even with him. In the end, after rather harsh checks, all suspicions were removed from Horatio. The detectives were convinced that Horatio had indeed accidentally stumbled upon the boy. He had the misfortune to be in that place just a few hours after Loris was declared missing. At the same time, the investigation ran out of assumptions and leads. No traces indicating the perpetrator could be found, so it was decided to call in reinforcements of Carabinieri from Rome to join the investigation. The new participants in the case, having studied all the materials, believed that the mother was involved in the disappearance of her son. They immediately drew attention to the problems in the relationship between Veronica and her relatives. The grandparents told the investigators that the deceased boy had told them about a strange experiment at school. According to the child, his mother had bought plastic zip ties needed for classes. The boy talked about this literally the day before his disappearance. This seemed suspicious because zip ties are quite a dangerous object and are prohibited from being used in school. When the detectives asked the teachers about this experiment, it turned out that they really had not planned anything like that and would not have needed any cable ties. Eventually, the investigators decided that the child had made them up. But after receiving the report from the forensic experts, the investigators remembered these items. According to the specialists who performed the autopsy, the time of the child's death fell between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning on the day he disappeared. The cause of the boy's death was strangulation by some foreign object of small thickness, tightened around his neck. It looks very much like he was strangled with cable ties. Then the investigators suggested that there might be a connection between these two facts. The forensic expert believed that the murder was committed somewhere near the place where the body was found, since the injuries from the fall were received almost immediately after death, or he was thrown out while still alive and died a little later. The detectives assumed that the child could really, for some reason, have wanted to get these ties and made up a story about their need at school.
Then Loris would have had to carry them in his backpack when he went to class. But how could the attacker have known about this? It raised great doubts that the killer attacked the boy, grabbed his backpack, and began to look for a murder weapon there. The Carabinieri considered it necessary to find the blue backpack, believing that it would give new clues. To do this, they blocked all the landfills where waste was brought from Santa Croce Camarina. In the end, it took the police several days to examine the dumps, but they never managed to find the boy's blue backpack. In addition to information about strangulation, the forensic medical examination made it possible to find out another strange circumstance. Despite the absence of underwear and the lowered pants, no signs of sexual violence or traces of the DNA of the probable pervert were found. From that moment on, the police had doubts about the previous version of events. They were still looking for the criminal, but already understood that this was not a typical maniac or molester. It no longer seemed that the crime was committed on sexual grounds. It was necessary to compile a full psychological profile of the killer. However, at this stage of the investigation, the information turned out to be too confusing, and it was problematic to do this. The solution suggested itself. The detectives decided to trace the path that the mother and child were moving on the day of the massacre. Despite the fact that it was a very small provincial town, Veronica and Loris were moving along the central street, where many houses had surveillance cameras installed. Of course, it took a lot of time to collect and view the recordings. It is clear that law enforcement officers tried to notice a third person following a woman with her son in a black Volkswagen Polo. Perhaps a suspicious car was following them. However, no matter how hard the investigators tried, they could not notice anything unusual that would be of interest to them. However, quite quickly, the detectives drew attention to several strange things. Firstly, they never managed to see the moment when the boy enters the school, although the mother continued to insist that she allegedly took him almost to the threshold of the educational institution. It became clear that Veronica was lying, and they did not reach the school that morning. After viewing dozens of hours of recordings, the investigators saw that only the younger child got out of the car near the kindergarten. The detectives continued to analyze the camera recordings from the entire district in search of clues. So they saw how at one of the intersections that Veronica was supposed to pass, she turned towards the church, not far from which the victim was later found. This seemed strange because for many years before that, she had used a different road. What could have forced the young mother to change her preferences on the very day when her son was found dead? This aroused certain suspicions among the Carabinieri. At this stage, the police officers decided not to disclose the discovered information so as not to startle Veronica, but began to consider the young woman as a suspect. Experienced policemen decided to immediately check the veracity of her words. To do this, Veronica was asked to drive with the investigators along the same route that she used on the day of the child's death so that she could show everything personally. They already knew the route as they had managed to completely restore it with the help of recordings from video surveillance cameras. The woman agreed, and they began to conduct a reconstruction of events. When the police car, together with Veronica, drove up to that decisive intersection where she changed her preferences, the woman lied. The detectives investigating the murder of 8-year-old Loris Stevil began to suspect his mother, Veronica Panarello, after discovering that she had lied about her route on the morning her son disappeared. During the investigative experiment, the woman indicated that she was moving along the usual path, although the surveillance camera recordings showed otherwise. The police decided to search the Stevil family's house and interrogate Veronica at the station. The young mother was outraged to learn that she was considered a likely killer of her own child. She insisted on her innocence, stating that under no circumstances would she have harmed her son. However, the investigators had reason to think otherwise. During the hours-long interrogation, Veronica admitted that she had dropped off her elder son Loris half a kilometer from the school that morning because she was in a hurry. According to her, someone could have attacked the boy on the way. The woman also denied being near the ravines where her son's body was found, assuring that she was not at all familiar with that area. However, the suspect's sister refuted these statements,
saying that in childhood they often visited there and knew those places well. Veronica's presence in the crime area was also confirmed by surveillance camera recordings. David Stevil, the father of the deceased boy, at first could not believe in his wife's involvement in the murder of their son. After viewing the video recordings, he recognized Veronica and the children, who left the house in the morning. But instead of taking Loris to school, the woman turned him back home. He was no longer visible on the recordings. Then Veronica took the younger child to the kindergarten and returned. Contrary to her habit, she drove into the garage in reverse rather than leaving the car in front of the house. According to the investigators, it was at this time between 9 and 10 in the morning that the crime occurred. Loris was not at school and stayed at home, and when his mother drove into the garage, she was doing something out of the camera's view. Despite all the evidence, Veronica continued to deny her guilt, insisting that she had taken her elder son to school and her younger son to kindergarten, after which she returned home. She suggested that Loris could have been kidnapped right outside the school. But the police did not believe this because they saw on the video how at 9:23 Veronica left the house again, and just 2 minutes later she was heading towards the old mill, where her son's body was soon found. Returning home at 9:38, she was definitely alone. Given the speed of events, the boy most likely was no longer breathing when he was thrown into the ditch. At 9:41, Veronica was already on her way to her usual cooking classes. She left early to arrive by the start of classes at 10 in the morning and not arouse suspicion. There, no one noticed any changes in her behavior. GPS data from Veronica's phone and car confirmed her movements established by the investigators. Unfortunately, the collected evidence was not yet sufficient for an official accusation, so the young mother was simply placed under arrest, and law enforcement officers continued to search for irrefutable evidence. At some point, it seemed that the suspect was about to be exposed, but suddenly, a policewoman who was on duty near the school turned to the station. She claimed that she had seen Veronica dropping Loris off at the educational institution on the day of the murder. However, the investigators did not trust these statements too much because they contradicted the video recordings. The policewoman could have simply confused the days since Veronica performed the same actions every morning. Meanwhile, the main suspect was behind bars, desperately proving her innocence. But the seeds of doubt had already been sown. When the carabinieri told David about the discrepancies in his wife's route, he also acknowledged her behavior as suspicious and sided with the investigation. The police saw this as an opportune moment to obtain a confession. They understood that the suspect most likely trusted her husband, so they decided to arrange a meeting between them, during which Davide would try to elicit some new details from his wife. After all, Veronica was the only person who had complete information about the events of that tragic morning. David agreed that it was a good idea, but noted that he did not seek his wife's conviction. 1 month after the brutal murder of 8-year-old Loris Stevil, on January 6, 2015, his father David came to meet with his arrested wife Veronica. Despite the fact that according to Italian law he had no right to be in prison, the police made an exception, hoping that it would help solve the crime. Veronica didn't even greet her husband, but immediately asked if he had a microphone for eavesdropping. Davide denied it and proved the absence of any recording devices. In fact, they were not needed because the meeting was being filmed by a prison surveillance camera. The suspect continued to insist on her innocence and version of events. She incessantly repeated to everyone, the police, the lawyer, her husband, relatives who visited her in prison, that she had taken her son to school and did not know what had happened to him next. The detectives could not prove the mother's involvement in the massacre. Even the motive itself raised doubts. Everyone who knew Veronica characterized her as a decent woman who sincerely loved her sons. Of course, there were various rumors, but the investigators checked every word and found no confirmation of the gossip. Veronica was indeed a caring mother. The only lead that seemed plausible to the detectives to explain the crime could be depression or emotional instability. The main suspect was indeed in a very depressed state, which only worsened due to her imprisonment. The investigation had reached a dead end, and it occurred to the investigators to allow the mother to visit the child's grave to say goodbye to him. Veronica was taken to the cemetery, accompanied by a whole motorcade of 10 cars with flashing lights on. It seemed as if a dangerous maniac was being transported through the city. A listening device was installed on the tombstone, of course. The officers were sure that by leaving the mother alone with her deceased son, they would hear an apology or a confession of murder. And Veronica started talking. But these were not at all the words that the police expected to hear. She was sobbing, praying, and swearing that she knew her boy's killer and would punish him. This came as a complete surprise to the carabinieri. Later, she was put in a car to be taken back to her cell. On the way, the young mother suddenly reported that at her son's grave she had some kind of insight. She admitted that she had begun to recall the events of that fatal day, which had previously eluded her memory. However, Veronica was not going to share this with the detectives. Instead, she expressed a desire to meet with her husband again. On November 6, 2015, David visited Veronica again. Of course, like all visits behind prison walls, this meeting was also recorded. This time, the main suspect admitted for the first time that she thought she had not taken the child to school at all on the day of his disappearance. The woman complained about difficulties in expressing her thoughts as she found herself in an unusual state. According to Veronica, that morning she seemed to have fallen out of reality, and everything around her seemed shrouded in fog. From her fragmentary memories, she was able to recreate how she took her younger son to kindergarten and then returned home, where Loris was supposed to be. She left her elder son at home because he did not want to go to school. But when she returned, Veronica did not find the boy. Being in a strange state, she thought that she had already taken him to school, but realized her mistake when she came to pick up the child from school, and he was not there. The police, of course, did not believe the new version, but were convinced that they were moving in the right direction. It almost resembled the very confession they had needed for a whole year to bring the killer to justice. They considered her excuse of memory loss an attempt to mitigate her guilt and get a shorter sentence than she deserved. However, not everyone shared this point of view, since the woman's condition really caused concern. Unfortunately, the younger son was still too young and could not testify to the police about whether he had seen his brother that day. Despite their confidence in Veronica's involvement in the murder, the carabinieri decided to meet her halfway and suggested going home in the hope that it would help unlock new memories. She was led through the rooms, which remained unchanged from the day of the boy's death. When the main suspect entered Loris's room, something theatrical began to happen. She started speaking in her son's voice and reproducing the dialogues that she allegedly had with him that morning. The detectives saw how emotionlessly she was doing it, and at that moment they became convinced that before them was a true pathological liar and manipulator who was once again trying to lead the investigation away from the truth. But could she, being in her right mind, have been deceiving everyone for more than a year? During this time, dozens of specialists had spoken with the suspect. Despite the fact that the police officers were not sure about the reliability of the new version of events told by the young mother, many still believe in it to this day. According to Veronica, after returning home from the kindergarten, she started washing baby bottles. Her elder son, Loris, did not want to go to school, so the woman allowed him to spend the whole day at home. While the mother was doing household chores, the boy was in his room. Veronica did not hear anything suspicious, but when she entered her son's room sometime later, she saw his blue body with cable ties tightened around his neck. The child had probably been playing with them and tried to tighten them around his neck. The ties were connected to each other like a necklace. As the woman recounted, her son froze with frightened eyes. He was pulling on one of the ends of the ties, thinking that this way he would be able to open them, but in fact, he was only tightening the deadly trap even more. The mother knew how they worked, but realized that she would not be able to tear them apart with her hands, so she ran to the kitchen for scissors. When the story's heroine returned and cut the fatal ribbon, the boy was no longer showing signs of life. He had lost consciousness and was not breathing.
According to Veronica's confession, she had a panic attack. She immediately took her cell phone and tried to dial the emergency service number. However, she was shaking so much that she simply could not dial the number. Her fingers were missing the buttons, and the numbers were blurring before her eyes. After all this, Veronica realized that she would be the one blamed for what had happened. Being in an inadequate state, she decided to get rid of her son's body. Later, the forensic medical examination confirmed the presence of scratches on the child's face and neck. They resembled real attempts to tear off the cable ties from him with fingernails. Unfortunately, the ties had cut too deep into the skin, so it was impossible to tear them off with hands. According to the investigators, in a panic, the mother could have pulled on one of the ends of the ties herself, which further aggravated the situation and finally cut off the access to oxygen. At this stage, the police decided to clarify the information and, if possible, awaken new memories, so Veronica and Davide were again taken to the place where Loris was found. Here, the mother admitted that she had indeed thrown the child into the ravine, but continued to deny that she had dealt with him herself. She still could not explain why the boy had no underwear. This circumstance did not fit into her story in any way. It also raised great doubts as to why an 8-year-old intelligent child would put these ties around his neck, tighten them more and more, and not even call for help. Later, the suspect recalled that the ravine turned out to be too deep, so the pants accidentally slipped off the body, and it twisted as the boy rolled to the bottom. At the trial, the prosecution tried to refute the mother's confession. Her uncharacteristic behavior was the most alarming. Veronica parked the car in the garage in a very unusual way, so that it was really convenient to load the body unnoticed. However, this happened at a moment when she could not yet have known about her son's death. According to her confession, he died later. In the opinion of the prosecution, this indicated the intentional nature of the murder. The defense continued to insist that the mother did not kill the child, but that he himself died due to negligence. Realizing the severity of what had happened, Veronica simply got scared. The woman was in a state of shock, so she took the body out and threw it away. However, she could not answer one of the key questions. The prosecution could not understand why she took the underwear off the boy and then put his pants back on. According to Veronica, she simply did not remember this. The prosecutor considered her actions an attempt to stage an attack on the boy by a rape in order to lead the investigation along the wrong path. Initially, her plan worked, and the police were looking for such a criminal, but later they realized that it was part of the staging. During the trial of this case, an unexpected plot twist emerged. Veronica admitted that Loris was killed by the boy's grandfather on his father's side, named Stevil. She allegedly had an affair with her husband's father. That day, the child caught them having sex and began to threaten that he would tell his father everything. Stevil, the boy's paternal grandfather, allegedly attacked his grandson in a fit of anger and strangled him. Despite this strange turn of events, law enforcement officers were forced to check the accused's statement. They turned to the surveillance camera recordings again. Thus, the investigators found out that none of the men had entered the house that morning. However, in the footage where Veronica was leaving the house around 9:30, a dark silhouette was indeed visible in the back seat of the car. The Carabinieri were forced to involve specialists for the analysis of the video recordings, but they claimed that it was not the shadow of a person, but glare on the car windows. Stevil himself denied both the connection with his son's wife and the murder of his grandson. He stated that this was another lie of a crazy woman. The grandfather had a confirmed alibi. In addition, there was no correspondence or even calls between the so-called lovers, which also refuted Veronica's words. Therefore, no one believed this new version of the defendant. Veronica's behavior suggested that the investigation was dealing with a person with mental disorders. Her strange behavior was emphasized by all the officers and specialists who communicated with her. One of the detectives recalled that during one of the interrogations, the woman suddenly began to sing, and also repeatedly her calm and loud speech changed to an indistinct mumbling under her breath with a blank look. Veronica seemed to periodically fall out of reality and could start smoking an imaginary cigarette. The defendant's mother said that Veronica had previously had mental problems. From an early age, she was repeatedly sexually abused by boys. At the age of 14, the girl tried to take her own life by drinking bleach after a quarrel with her school friends. The following year, she tried to hang herself in a greenhouse. Veronica underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic. Once she called her mother and asked her to pick her up because the paramedic had allegedly raped her. But these accusations did not receive any confirmation, and no one believed the girl. A psychiatric examination showed that Veronica acted in a cold-blooded, prudent, and cruel manner. No serious mental disorders were found in her that would allow her to be declared insane. The trial lasted a whole 4 years due to constant postponements and additional investigations. Based on the results of the trial, she was found guilty of premeditated murder and concealment of the body. The judge sentenced her to 30 years in prison. After that, another performance took place. Obviously, the child's grandfather, whom Veronica referred to as the criminal, was in the courtroom. The defendant did not agree with the verdict, so she stood up and again began to accuse the man of all those absurd things that she had already voiced earlier in court. She was removed from the courtroom and sent behind bars. Veronica is still in prison, keeping the terrible truth of the death of the 8-year-old boy, which we will probably never know. However, most of the investigators who worked on this case believe that it was not an accident, but a planned, brutal murder. Probably, on that day, the son did not want to go to school. This had happened before. It was not the first case of him skipping. On this basis, the mother quarreled with her son and strangled him with ties in a fit of anger, and then got rid of the body, deliberately removed his underwear to confuse the investigation. But since the ties were purchased in advance, perhaps it all looked even more ominous and indicated the planning of the murder. The boy's father stated after the trial that his life was destroyed because he had simultaneously lost his son, wife, and job. The man is still not sure that it was Veronica who killed the boy. He did not understand what could have been the reason for killing his son. David had never seen his wife display violence towards the children. She had always been a caring mother. Now he is trying to live for the sake of his younger son, in whose upbringing his parents are helping him. The story of Veronica Panarello and her son Loris is a tragic tale of how impulsive decisions, lack of maturity, and emotional instability can lead to devastating consequences. This case serves as a cautionary tale for all parents about the importance of responsible parenting and the need to overcome one's own psychological issues for the safety and well-being of their family. The main cause of this tragedy was Veronica's inability to cope with the challenges of motherhood at such a young age. Her emotional immaturity, possible mental disorders, and lack of proper support from loved ones created a dangerous combination of factors that ultimately led to the child's death. To prevent such tragedies, it is crucial that young parents have access to the resources and support necessary for raising children. This includes parenting education, emotional support, counseling, and assistance in case of psychological issues. Society as a whole should pay more attention to the mental health and well-being of families, especially those facing additional challenges such as early and unplanned pregnancies. Radical ideologies often cross the line of common sense, causing their followers to lose touch with reality. It's even worse when the victims of manipulation sincerely begin to believe in the illusions imposed on them. One example of the tragic consequences that blind faith in destructive ideas can lead to occurred in Sweden, a country that has always been considered one of the safest in the world due to its extremely low level of violent crime. In the small Swedish village of Björnberg, on July 27, 1971, a boy named Helge Fossmo was born into a family that was not particularly religious. He became one of 5 children in the family. Despite the lack of religious upbringing, at the age of 12, Helge independently became interested in the church and joined a local youth religious group, becoming one of its most active participants. Although his parents did not share their son's enthusiasm, they did not hinder him, believing that it was not the worst occupation for a teenager. According to Helge himself,
It was from the moment he joined the church community that his life acquired true meaning, and he found a kind of salvation in faith. For the next 5 years, the young man completely devoted himself to religion, constantly attending church services and participating in various church events. In 1988, fate led Helge to a cafe for Christian youth, where he met his future wife, Helen Johansson. The young couple got married as soon as they came of age and settled in the town of Bordenberg. The couple had 2 children, and Helge continued to delve into religious issues, becoming a preacher in the local community. However, in 1993, a fateful meeting took place that radically changed the life of Helge and his family. The man met Asa Waldau, a charismatic leader of a Christian sect known as the Bride of Christ. Asa came from the tiny town of Knutby, where her teachings originated, with the intention of opening a branch of her church in Bordenberg. Knutby is such a small settlement with a population of about 700 people that there is only one store, one restaurant, a church, and a few dozen wooden houses scattered among the forest. It would seem that in such a cozy corner, there is no place for evil. But it was here at that time that people lived who later committed 3 horrific murders that overshadowed the crimes of many serial killers in their scale and cruelty. Asa traveled from town to town, preaching her teachings and recruiting new followers, especially among young people. She masterfully manipulated people's minds, urging them to give up everything worldly and devote their lives to serving her church. Helge's family turned out to be an ideal target for the ambitious Bride of Christ. Helge's first meeting with Asa did not go quite smoothly. The devoted Christian expressed doubts that a woman could be a pastor. However, thanks to her remarkable manipulative abilities, Asa managed to convince the Fosmo family to join her sect, not suspecting what tragic and irreversible consequences this would lead to. Skeptical of Asa's radical views and methods, especially after realizing her affiliation with a sect, Helge initially rejected the idea of joining the Bride of Christ community. However, the ambitious preacher did not give up. She was interested in attracting the young Fosmo couple to her ranks, so she acted cautiously and methodically. Over the next 4 years, Asa gradually gained the trust of Helge and Helen, convincing them of the safety of her church's activities. At the same time, she promoted her own teachings, which increasingly captivated Helge. Eventually, in 1997, the couple agreed not only to join Asa's community, but also to move to the town of Knutby, where her church was located. At first, the move was presented as an ordinary, friendly visit. Asa showed the young family her church from the inside, told them about its activities and goals. Gradually, she increasingly gained the attention of her new followers, criticizing the shortcomings of the traditional church, which eventually sowed a seed of doubt in Helge's mind. A significant part of the residents of Knutby already belonged to Asa's religious community and were involved in various areas of the church's activities. The organization provided work for everyone who wanted it, and almost every member of the community had their own responsibilities, often related to religious service. This brought people together who knew each other well, supported and protected their own. The community gladly accepted the new preacher Helge and his family into their ranks. Having become a pastor of the church in Knutby, Helge quickly drew attention to himself with unconventional motives in his sermons. He often spoke on taboo topics such as sex and death, interpreting them rather dubiously. Despite the fact that not all parishioners shared the radical approach to the interpretation of Scripture, Helge relentlessly pursued his mission. 2 years after the move, the Fosmo family had their 3rd child, which increased the burden on the parents. They decided to hire a nanny, Sarah Svensson, who had recently moved to Knutby, inspired by Asa's teachings. Sarah had grown up in a deeply religious Christian family, but from childhood suffered from severe allergies, which limited her life. The girl was cared for by her mother, with whom she had a very close relationship. But at the age of 11, Sarah lost her mother due to a long illness. This event devastated the girl, turning her into a troubled teenager who often ran away from home. After his wife's death, the entire burden of raising his daughter fell on the father.
Despite all his efforts, the man could not fully replace Sarah's mother, although they also had a close bond. The girl stayed with her father until she accidentally met Asa during her travels around the cities in search of new followers. Their acquaintance took place at Bible courses and quickly grew into a close friendship. Sarah turned out to be an ideal candidate for recruitment into the sect. For the experienced manipulator Asa, it was not difficult to discern the girl's vulnerable spots and skillfully use them to lure her into her community. Eventually, Sarah decided to move to Knutby to be closer to the church and comprehend the ways that Asa preached. During this period, Helgi became closer to Asa than ever before. They spent a lot of time together, not only delving into the study of Scripture. This couple claimed to receive divine messages, which they interpreted as prophecies. Helgi diligently wrote down these revelations in his diary, describing in detail the visions, sensations, and their interpretation. One of these records stated that God named Helgi the King of Kings and Asa the Queen of Heaven. According to the pastor, he appeared in the world even at the time of the creation of the world, and since then had been waiting for a meeting with an equal being, Asa. The woman, in turn, insisted that she should marry Helgi, because their union would elevate the alternative religion to an incredible height. Both unreservedly believed in these ideas. In 1999, they arranged a kind of sacrament, the wedding ceremony of Helgi and Asa. The man gave her a ring with 7 diamonds, because this number has a sacred meaning in many faiths. And all this despite the fact that Helen was still the official wife of the pastor. Of course, such a course of events caused unbearable jealousy on the part of Helen, which led to a rift in her relationship with her husband. Then Asa intervened. She criticized the young wife for jealousy, calling this feeling the most shameful for a true Christian. The sect leader insisted that Helen should change her attitude, otherwise the community would find a way to create serious problems for her, in particular, to take away the house. The intimidated woman was forced to come to terms. The relationship between Helgi and Asa took on an increasingly strange hue. Despite the fact that the pastor was still officially married, he hardly engaged with his family, spending all his time with Asa. This became especially noticeable after their sacrament. The woman constantly showered him with love and praise, attaching him to herself more and more. Asa skillfully used Helgi's devotion not to build a strong relationship or even to separate him from his wife. Her only goal was to establish complete control over the man. Acting insidiously and effectively, she quickly achieved her goal. Helgi found himself completely dependent on her. Asa knew everything about him, and sex, which they constantly engaged in, became the most powerful weapon of manipulation. At the same time, the sect leader convinced the pastor that he could literally embody Jesus. All these absurd ideas multiplied like a snowball, and the behavior of Helgi and Asa became more and more outrageous and abnormal. Neither Helen, nor the children, nor other members of the community could influence this situation. Given Asa's manipulative nature, tensions in the Knutby community grew steadily, portending inevitable tragedy. In December 1999, the town was gripped by an epidemic of illness, which did not spare the Fosmo couple. Confined to bed by illness, Helga and Helen were forced to transfer most of the household chores to nanny and housekeeper Sarah Svensson, who miraculously escaped infection. On the morning of December 18th, despite feeling unwell, the couple had breakfast together, after which an exhausted Helgi decided to lie down to rest. Having fallen fast asleep, the man heard a knock at the door through his dream. Upon waking up, he found that his wife was nowhere to be found. It turned out that a concerned neighbor had come to their house, who had not heard any news from the couple all day. Helge assured the neighbor that everything was fine, but he insisted on seeing Helen. The woman did not respond to loud calls, although she definitely had to be at home. Remembering that his wife was going to take a shower, Helgi became worried about her long absence. The men decided to check what had happened. Since Helen did not respond to her name, they had to break the lock with a screwdriver. In the overflowing bathtub, they found the lifeless body of a woman floating face down. The door was locked from the inside, and Helen was still wearing the nightgown she had worn at breakfast. Helgi's eerie scream attracted the attention of several neighbors who ran to the house. Together, they pulled the body out of the water and tried to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but it was too late. 27-year-old Helen was pronounced dead. The autopsy revealed that the deceased woman had a serious head injury that could well have been fatal. The forensic expert suggested several possible causes of death. Obviously, the resulting traumatic brain injury could lead to loss of consciousness and, as a result, drowning of the young mother. Even more questions were raised by the results of a toxicological examination, which revealed an extremely high dose of opioids in the victim's blood. According to calculations, this amount of drugs would be enough to kill Helen, but the woman never took any drugs. Despite all the signs of a possible murder, law enforcement officers classified this case as an accident. They concluded that Helen slipped, fell, and hit her head on the faucet. Sarah Svensson's testimony played an important role in this, confirming every word of the pastor that his wife was alone in the bathroom and no one could kill her. Helgi appeared grief-stricken and sincerely saddened by the loss of his beloved wife. However, those who knew him more closely noticed some strange changes in the behavior of the widower. In particular, he almost immediately got rid of all the things associated with Helen and never mentioned her again, even forbidding the children to talk about their mother. Some suspected that Helen's death was not an accident, but that the unwanted wife was simply gotten rid of so that she would not interfere with ambitious plans. In addition, it became known that the man personally influenced the conclusion of the forensic medical examination. At first, Helgi, citing religious beliefs, demanded that an autopsy not be performed at all, but he was refused due to the suspicious circumstances of the death. Then the preacher insisted on removing information about the presence of opioids in the blood of the deceased from the conclusion. He explained his demand by the desire to minimize the likelihood that his wife could have committed suicide, because it is a sin because of which her soul will not go to heaven. With these dubious actions, Helgi allegedly sought to protect Helen's memory and the reputation of his family from shame. Suddenly, during this period, Asa lost interest in Helga. Their stormy romance was cut short when she once again went on a pilgrimage and decided not to return. Unfortunately, the charismatic leader managed to thoroughly brainwash the pastor, who was filled with determination to continue on the path of the sect. Despite the ostentatious grief and tears, Helgi very quickly found a new love in the person of Asa's sister, Alexandra Waldau. The relationship between the lovers developed rapidly, greatly facilitated by Helga's high status. At that time, many considered him a person close to God, so they treated him with great respect, which also bribed Alexandra. Already in the spring of 2000, she moved into the pastor's house and soon they got married. However, even a new marriage did not curb Helga's sexual appetites. One woman was always not enough for him, so already in the spring of 2001, he began to actively court the nanny of his children, Sarah Svensson, who still worked in his house. The girl readily accepted signs of attention from such a respected man. Their relationship even received a blessing from the sect leader Asa Waldau. By the time these events unfolded, Helga's relationship with Alexandra had deteriorated. Nanny Sarah, who became the pastor's lover, tried to support him in solving family problems. Helgi cynically took advantage of the girl's sympathy, often inviting her to pray together in the church. During these prayer meetings, the man often inclined Sarah to intimacy, insisting that this had nothing to do with satisfying carnal desires, but was a kind of spiritual union and a message to God. So strong was Sarah's belief in Helga's righteousness that she willingly believed these stories and even felt some kind of divine inspiration at such moments. The girl sincerely believed that she was doing a godly deed, although in fact she fell into the trap of a skilled manipulator who covered himself with spiritual values, having goals far from religion. Shortly after the beginning of this relationship, Helgi began to voice increasingly contradictory statements. At first, he declared that the Lord was waging his battles on earth, and the pastor himself was his warrior. According to Helgi, this mission was not easy because sometimes it was necessary to remove various obstacles along the way. The man spoke in riddles, and the naive Sarah, who perceived her lover's sermons as divine revelations, willingly believed everything. In fact, Helgi was gradually probing the ground for the implementation of his insidious plan. Later, the pastor began to tell that during sex, God sends him important messages about the fate of his second wife, Alexandra. Helgi interpreted these signs as a portent of her imminent death. Brainwashing Sarah, he claimed that the Lord had shown him the ideal life companion, herself, the nanny. Moreover, Helgi intimidated the girl by saying that he himself could die if his marriage to Alexandra was not dissolved. Although during this period their union was falling apart at the seams, the pastor could not get a divorce due to strict church rules. Like all the women in Helga's entourage, Sarah was enchanted by his stories. With these bizarre messages, he gradually led the nanny of his children to commit a terrible act. The skilled manipulator managed to firmly tie the victim to himself, using his authority in the church and knowledge of Sarah's vulnerabilities. Helgi adopted many techniques of such control from Asa, and now willingly put them into practice. At that time, many people seriously considered the pastor to be the person closest to God, so it was not difficult for him to persuade the nanny to his side. According to Helgi, the girl had to help the Almighty in the battle with demons, for which she needed to move in with him, despite the fact that he was still living with Alexandra. The women lived in different rooms, and Helga had sex with both of them every night in turn, each time justifying it as a fight against evil spirits. The pastor called intimate relationships a ritual of purification from defilement. His eloquence allowed him to convince his mistresses that he was a messenger of heaven, and in this way opposed the enemies of the Lord. These peculiar three-way relationships lasted until 2003, although Helgi already wanted to get rid of Alexandra, with whom he allegedly broke up, but could not officially divorce. During this period, the manipulation of Sarah reached its apogee. For the most part, Helgi turned to her only for sex, and the rest of the time he insulted her, calling her a sinner and an arrogant blonde. But each time he ended the emotional torture with the phrase, "I love you." The girl was so happy with these three words that she stopped paying attention to all the insults. She was willing to do anything to earn the favor of the chosen one of God, a fighter against demons, not even noticing how, along with this, she was losing her own will, turning into a puppet in the hands of a dangerous man. Against the backdrop of problems with his second wife, Helgi repeatedly asked his mistress if she was ready to kill in the name of the Lord. If earlier Sarah hesitated with the answer, now, it seemed, she reacted more calmly, and the pastor felt that he would soon be able to persuade her to do it. The girl replied that she was not ready, but resisted much weaker than before. Then, to push Sarah on the true path, Helgi created a new account in the Messenger and began sending her messages from an unknown number, trying to convince her that it was God himself who wanted to contact her. In these creepy correspondences, the girl was told that she had little time left and she had to kill in the name of the Lord no later than November 25th. When Sarah suspected that Helga was behind these messages, he angrily denied his involvement, once again shaming his mistress, accusing her of a lack of faith and sinfulness. Unfortunately, it worked as it had before. Afterward, the pastor began sending Sarah messages that she should become part of the divine plan, sending human souls to heaven. This alleged God claimed that for her, this was the only way to salvation. Helga's manipulations and intimidation led Sarah to begin to fear for her soul and dare to commit a crime. On November 8, 2003, she broke into the pastor's house and attacked his wife Alexandra, who was sleeping in her bed. Sarah hit her with a hammer, but the woman miraculously managed to survive and fight off the attacker. The reason for the attack was a message that Sarah allegedly received from God via messenger. It contained an order to immediately kill the preacher's wife. Oddly enough, the criminal escaped punishment, probably due to Helga's insistence not to report the incident to the police. Indeed,
no record of this event was found in the law enforcement database. Instead of punishment, the pastor expelled his former mistress to live with her own father. However, this did not affect Sarah's correspondence with God in any way, which only fueled her terrifying confidence in the need to kill. Shortly after these events, Helga found a new passion, a neighbor, Annette Lind, who at that time was married to a man named Daniel. Having decided to get rid of a competitor, the preacher began sending messages to Sarah, manipulating her in the same way as before. The frightened girl, seeking salvation, again agreed to take up arms. This time, Sarah prepared more thoroughly. She bought a pistol and even researched on the internet how to make a homemade silencer. Following the instructions of the Almighty, she hoped for success and the liberation of her soul. On January 10, 2004, at 3:30 in the morning, Sarah, keeping in touch with Helga, drove up in her father's car to the area where the pastor lived. Having parked 500 meters from the house, the killer put on a black mask and put on shoes of different sizes to throw the police off the trail. Entering through the unlocked door, the lock of which the organizer of the crime broke in advance, staging a robbery, Sarah crept into the room of 23-year-old Alexandra, who was sleeping soundly. Having shot first in the thigh and then, when the victim woke up and screamed, in the head, the criminal killed the woman. At 4:30 in the morning, Sarah went to the house of the second victim, Daniel, the husband of Helga's new mistress. The pastor knew that the man was left alone that night and told Sarah about it. The doors were locked, so the girl just knocked. When 30-year-old Daniel opened the door, she shot him in the chest without hesitation, and when he fell, once more in the head. Fleeing from the crime scene, Sarah did not suspect that the second victim had survived. Daniel managed to get to the phone and call for help. Arriving at the call, the police found him conscious, so he was able to describe the attacker. At that moment, 32-year-old Helgi was already at the crime scene, allegedly trying to help his neighbor. Helgi accompanied the wounded Daniel to the hospital, where he learned about the murder of his wife Alexandra. The pastor again began to play the role of a grief-stricken husband. The description of the attacker provided by Daniel was rather confusing due to the mask on her face. Gradually, attention focused on Helgi and Sarah. One of the neighbors, whose brains had not yet been washed, recalled similar strange circumstances of the death of the pastor's first wife. Information also surfaced about the hammer attack on Alexandra, during which she nearly died at the hands of Sarah. The bloody fingerprints found at the scene of Alexandra's murder and on the door of Daniel's house became irrefutable proof of the 26-year-old nanny's guilt. Sarah was immediately arrested. At first, she insisted that she acted independently, without anyone's prompting, and then began to claim that she committed crimes in the name of God. During a search of Sarah, a phone was seized, where Helga's number and another unknown subscriber were found. Although no correspondence with the Almighty was found on this device, the detectives came across a call from Sarah's old number. Thorough searches of her house revealed another mobile phone, which stored more than 1,000 text messages with God. These messages contained intrusive manipulation and incitement to murder. After tracking the unknown number, the investigation led to the pastor of the local church. Learning about this, the disappointed Sarah, who sincerely believed in the divine origin of the correspondence, told the police the whole truth. The wounded Daniel's wife, Annette Lind, was also suspected of complicity and arrested, but 2 weeks later, she was released without charge. During the trial, the arrogant Helge denied his involvement and showed no remorse. A psychiatric examination found him sane. The scale of the manipulations was staggering. Having sufficient evidence, the prosecutor's office proved Helge's guilt in inciting the murder of Alexandra and the attempt on Daniel's life. In July 2004, the pastor was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 24 years. Despite several appeals that were rejected, Helgi will only have a chance for early release in 2028. He was also accused of involvement in the death of his first wife, but was acquitted due to lack of evidence, although the prosecutor is convinced of his guilt. In 2007, while in prison, Helgi married for the third time,
the identity of his new wife remains unknown. During an interview in August 2006, the imprisoned pastor admitted his involvement in the murder of Alexandra and the attack on Daniel, claiming that several other people were involved in organizing the crimes. However, the case was never reopened. Currently, Helge Fossmo is serving his sentence in the maximum security prison Tidaholm in Sweden. At the trial, a video was shown with a reconstruction of the crime, where Sarah spoke in detail about what she had done. A private investigation revealed that the court was shown an edited version, while the original 6-hour recording contained discrepancies with the actual details of the crime. In interviews with journalists, Sarah adhered to the false reconstruction of events. This raised doubts about the true course of events and the identity of the main culprit. It was assumed that the murderer could be the pastor himself, who shifted the responsibility to Sarah. Sarah Svensson, recognized as insane, was placed in a psychiatric hospital. In 2011, after completing treatment, she was released, as doctors considered her safe for society. In 2020, sect leader Asa Waldau was convicted on 8 counts of assaulting former parishioners and sentenced to community service. The woman changed her last name, moved, and withdrew from church affairs. Thanks to the efforts of doctors, Daniel survived the attack but refused to return to the city, fearing the local church and sectarians. Another pastor of the same church, Urban Feld, was convicted of sexual exploitation of persons dependent on him. Several women from the community whom he called his daughters and manipulated. The moral of this chilling story is that blind faith and fanaticism can lead to terrible consequences, especially when manipulated by ruthless and charismatic individuals. The tragedy in Knutby demonstrates how religious beliefs, taken to extremes, can cloud the mind and push people to the most terrible acts. The main tragedy of this story was not only the murder of Alexandra and the attempt on Daniel's life, but also the ruined lives of all those who fell under the pernicious influence of Pastor Helge Fossmo. Sarah Svensson suffered the most, a young girl who, due to naivety and gullibility, became a toy in the hands of an experienced manipulator. Her sincere faith was cynically used to achieve selfish goals, which led to irreparable consequences. To protect yourself from such situations, it is necessary to always maintain critical thinking and not allow anyone to manipulate your consciousness, even if it is a spiritual leader. You cannot blindly trust authorities and follow instructions that are contrary to morality and common sense. Faith should be a conscious choice, not an instrument of control in the hands of other people. It is important to remember that true religion brings love, mercy, and forgiveness, not hatred, condemnation, and violence.